Do you think it's got something to do with the fact that normally
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for the Cherry Hill Public Schools Board of Education meeting, December 7th, 2021. Public notice of this meeting pursuant to the Open Publics Meeting Act has been given by the Board Secretary on December 1st, 2021 in the following manner. Posted notice on the school bulletin board at the Administration Building, transmitted to the Courier Post, Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Clerk of Cherry Hill Township. Please join me in the pledge. Will be led by Michael Nguyen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'll now turn it over to Mrs. Sugars for roll call.
Mrs. Arroyo. Here. Mrs. Stratton. Here. Ms. Friedel. Mrs. Matlack.
Here.
Mr. Avadia.
Here.
Mrs. Schultz. Here. Ms. Stern.
here?
Mrs. Tong. Here. Mrs. Neary.
Here. Okay, we don't have any board recognition this evening, and that'll bring us to presentations, and I will turn it over to Dr. Malash.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. I am very excited about the presentation that we're going to have an opportunity to view and to listen to from a wonderful group of presenters. And I'm thrilled to introduce Mrs. LaKoya Wethington, who is our Assistant Superintendent for Compliance, Equity, and Student Services, and her team, as they're going to deliver a presentation about our middle schools and how we determine, or the determination for what children will attend which schools. So Mrs. Wethington, if you are set to go.
Just give me a minute to share my screen, Dr. Malash.
Of course.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. We're excited to be here to talk about the work that we've done for the middle school redistricting committee. We have a lot of information to get through, so I'm just going to ask that you hold your questions till we're at the end of the presentation. So the district goals guided the work that the committee did in looking at redistricting. Student wellness was one of the first goals that we looked at, considering the major activity of promoting shared ethical values visibly and comprehensively through our character education work, cultural proficiency work, and equity work. The other was connecting beyond our classrooms, where one of our major activities is the redistricting work. Our charge was finding creative redistricting options to equitably redistrict middle schools and to report our recommendations to the board by December. Our committee members, our guest committee members are standing in front. I'm just going to ask everyone to stand up just for a moment. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. They will introduce themselves when we get to the portion of the presentation where they're presenting options to the board. So our timeline, we started our work in July. We're 5 months into the work that we've been doing. We looked at different criteria to make our determinations, provided updates to the strategic planning committee, looked at a lot of data, did a lot of analysis. Earlier in the academic year, the board revised the open enrollment policy, and here we are in December, making our presentation to the board. After this, we will solicit feedback, and then the board will finalize their plans for the boundaries. So I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Janet Cohen and Mrs. Val Schmidt-Sadwin, who will talk about the historical context.
Okay. The next slide. Oh. I don't have anything on this one. Okay. Yes, so this slide, what impressed me most about this slide is that, wow, the district has been talking about junior high and middle school schools for a long time. 1959, that was the year that I was born, and Cherry Hill was not even yet named Cherry Hill. The next slide. Okay, going all the way up to 1992 to 1993. This was a time, and you'll see a whole lot of things that they were planning for. They were expecting enrollment growth, and they were right. And here is just a number of ways that they were trying to plan for it. At this point in time, 1992 to 1993, the district had 9,800 students and was climbing.
Hi, and I'm Janet Cohen. I'm the administrative assistant for Dr. Malash, and I've lived in the Cherry Hill community for over 30 years. And in 1998, Superintendent Mort Sherman came to the district, and there were a lot of changes that the Board of Education wanted to make at the time. The enrollment had gone up about 800 students since 1992. And there was a crisis, at least that was what the community felt that it was, with this increase in enrollment, and the elementary schools were bursting at the seams. And so the recommendations were to move the 6th grade students out of the elementary schools into the middle schools. And at the time, there were only 2. The decision was presented that the Heritage Building, which had kept the administration at the time, be converted to a middle school, which then became Rosa. And they were also going to move, what they did in those early years, or right after that, was they decided to move a subsection of the elementary sixth graders into Beck and Carusi as a trial period. And they were also going to keep the two high schools intact as they were. They instituted open enrollment for the high schools, and they moved the preschool program from Malberg to Berkeley, which had been leased as a Christian school. In February, Dr. Sherman made some additional recommendations, and there were 5 committees formed, which comprised administrators. There were community members and district liaisons also to those committees, with the major focus of creating uniform boundaries, trying to solve the overcrowding issues, and reducing class size. And then in June of 1998, those plans started coming together a little bit better. The board approved some of those moves that I mentioned earlier. Then the most important for this evening's conversation was to create a magnet school at Rosa with the International Baccalaureate program as the curriculum. And also at the same time, they moved the alternative high school program from where was it? Hold on a second. Oh, yes, it was at Malberg, and then they moved it to Rosa temporarily. So there were a lot of shifts in student body at that time. And then the board approved the administrative recommendation for grade level reconfiguration. They created Malberg as the early childhood center. So Malberg itself has gone through a lot of transitions over the course of time. They moved special ed classes to the district elementary schools. They implemented open enrollment, as I mentioned before. They created an IB program at West to keep the continuity of the IB program for the students that attended Rosa to be able to get the certificate if they chose to do that by going to West. They lowered class size at the elementary schools. They created the bumping or the, what is the other word for that? Yeah. The old policy number was 5117, and that moved students where there were oversized classes at the elementary school to a neighboring elementary school, and then provided them with transportation. So a lot of changes occurred during this time. So you have to understand that Rosa, which wasn't named at that time, was the grand experiment. And the district, with their proposal, didn't know whether they would have enough students to sign up for Rosa to make it a viable option. But they also knew that they better come up with a plan if too many students enrolled. And hence, here is policy 5117.1, where it was high school open enrollment, yes, but it also created the Rosa lottery process. Next, okay, great. And then we talk about December 1998 and the report of the Elementary Redistricting Committee. There's 8 goals here, and they're good goals, but that's a lot of goals for a committee. So they decided to focus on 3 goals: uniform boundaries, overcrowding, and reducing class sizes. And the overcrowding and reducing the class sizes were remedied by the passing of the bond in building additional classrooms. And as far as uniform boundaries, not a single boundary was changed as a result of the Elementary Redistricting Committee. The bond was then passed in March 1999, and that solved many of the concerns at that time, allowing the district to move forward. Shortly after that bond passed, the budget failed, which was an interesting situation. It created a review by town council, and they were the ones that made the decision as to what got cut and what was sustained in the budget. We no longer have that, which is a wonderful thing. In December of 2001 was the first time the early childhood education full-day kindergarten program was discussed. And as you'll recall, that was implemented 2 years ago. So it took nearly 20 years for that to happen. The committee used research-based practices to make this determination, and they expanded that pre-K program at Berkeley to involve a lot of different programs. And then, just last month, you revised the open enrollment policy that in effect changes Rosa from a magnet school to a middle school based on boundary guidelines.
Thank you.
We're reading the sign, so we're fine.
So the next couple slides just offer a context for some of the terminology that you're going to see later on in the presentation. So the first is economically disadvantaged, and it just provides the definition, how we derive that using the National School Lunch Program definition. The second are data notes. Mrs. Schmidt-Sadwin, who is very humble, did a lot of the work for us, looking at the data and slicing the data. So there are projections and maximum projections, and that just explains how we got there. Building capacity, board members are familiar with the GRIP report, so we use that report to determine building capacity, which aligns with the long-range facilities plan. And then just for the purpose of this presentation, just so that you're aware that the SWOT analysis looks at the capacity for each option that's been considered. So during our time together, we developed 5 different options that we looked at and examined, and each committee member in a pair is going to present the options. They are not aligned to any of the options that they're presenting. They've just been assigned an option to review as a part of the team. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Barbara Wilson and Mr. Jared Peltzman, who are going to do option number 1.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So as Ms. Wethington said, my name is Jared Peltzman, principal at Johnson Elementary School. So I'm going to be discussing option 1. So I do want to emphasize that these options are not in order of preference. It's just for organizational purposes that they're numbered. So option 1, as you can see, it sends 4 elementary schools to each middle school based on the proximity of the elementary school to the middle school. So this is your basic proximity option. So the middle school, the elementary schools go to the middle school that is closest to them, broken down as 4 elementary schools to each middle school. So Beck would be receiving students from Cooper, Hart, Sharp, Stockton. Carissa would be receiving students from Barton, Kilmer, Kingston, and Payne. And Rosa will be receiving students from Johnson, Knight, Mann, and Woodcrest. As you can see, based on projected enrollments, this does present a challenge. You can see that highlighted next to Rosa under projected enrollment. And just to go back to the slide that Ms. Wethington had presented, this is based on the enrollment of 2019 in our projections in our enrollment from 2019, not the maximum projected. I'll go into the challenge of that number in the next slide. But I did want to remind everybody that it was the projected enrollment, not the maximum projected. So you can see on the slide in front of you, that is a breakdown of students by race based on the 2020-2021 enrollment, and then the projected enrollment using option number 1. So you can, I'm not going to go through the data with you since you have it in front of you, but you can take a look at how the enrollment by race would change if we adopted option 1. And next to that, you can see how the enrollment for students who are economically disadvantaged changes based on projected enrollment from the 2020-2021, so their current configuration, to the projected enrollment based on the configuration in option number 1. I will talk briefly about that once we get into the SWOT chart. Next slide, there we go. So using the SWOT analysis really allows us to kind of focus on the key aspects of each option. For option one, as you can see, a key strength is the convenience of students going to the middle school that is closest to their elementary school. Right? That's the key component of this one. It's a geographically based option. For most students, this means less time in transit and the subsequent benefit of things like decreased carbon emissions, things like that. Now, the key weakness of option one is that Beck would not be representative in regards to the district in terms of demographics or economically disadvantaged. But the big one being that the physical plant of Rosa couldn't accommodate the amount of students projected going to Rosa. So we would exceed the capacity if we sent those 4 elementary schools to Rosa. Threat piece. As I noted on the previous slide, right, the major threat that you'll notice is the building capacity of Rosa. So based on option one, I think, I can't recall the number off the top of my head, I want to say 813 students would be going to Rosa if those 4 elementary schools did, and that would exceed the capacity of Rosa. The flip side of that threat is the opportunity for the expansion of the physical plant of Rosa, and it could potentially reduce traffic since students will be on shorter bus rides. So there are positives to it, obviously, in terms of the geographic closeness, in terms of the 4 elementary schools being split evenly amongst the three middle schools, but there are significant challenges to adopting the model, primarily, I don't say primarily, but majorly being the size of Rosa. Right? That's a big challenge that we'll be facing if you chose to adopt option number one. So at this point, I'm going to kick it over to Ms. Katsikis and Dr. Mahan to review option number 2.
Good evening. I'm Violeta Katsikis, one of the curriculum supervisors in the central office. I have the pleasure of sharing with you option number 2. As you can see in the overview for option number 2, in this option, students are assigned a middle school based on the elementary school and middle school locations, with the exception of Russell Knight students who would attend Carusi under option number 2.
Thank you, Ms. Katsikis. I'm Farah Mahan. I'm one of the assistant superintendent. For option 2, as Mr. Peltzman shared in option 1, here is the breakdown of sending schools along with the enrollment projections. This option sends 4 schools to Beck, Cooper, Hart, Sharp, and Stockton, 5 schools to Carusi, Barton, Kilmer, Kingston, Knight, and Payne, and 3 schools to Rosa, Johnson, Mann, and Woodcrest. On the next slide, you will see the breakdown by race based on 2020-2021 demographic information and the projections for enrollment based on the option 2 sending sections. On the next slide, and again, this is all for option 2, is the breakdown for economically disadvantaged, again by school, for Beck, Carusi, and Rosa for the 2020-2021 school year, and then the projected economically disadvantaged numbers based on the option 2 sending areas.
So as with option 1, we administered the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to option number 2. We identified one key strength in option number 2, where there would be an increase in the number of ESL students in the upper grades, 7 and 8, which would essentially create peer groups for the other ESL students in those grades. We identified one weakness. As you can see by the projected enrollment, there would be a very low enrollment at Rosa, which would be inequitable in comparison to Carusi and Beck. There were no identified opportunities or threats for option number 2. At this time, I'd like to introduce Linda King and Caitlin Mallory for option number 3.
Good evening. I'm Caitlin Mallory. I'm the Director of Special Education, and I am going to be doing an overview of option 3, which, as you can see, sends 5 elementary schools to Beck, 4 elementary schools to Carusi, and 3 to Rosa. This model in particular better redistributes economically disadvantaged students among the 3 middle schools. So as with the first 2 options, looking at option 3, it's presented in the same manner with this breakdown of elementary schools being sent to the 3 middle schools. And then there's enrollment projections as well. Looking at enrollment by race, current enrollment by race compared to projected enrollment by race, there's different percentages and a breakdown that option 3 offers. Finally, on the next slide, economically disadvantaged, current economically disadvantaged compared to what would be projected for our economically disadvantaged breakdown. There's the most significant change, which we will note, is that of Rosa. It's more equitable distribution as it's related to our economically disadvantaged students. Now I will turn it over to Linda.
Hi, I'm Linda King. I am the transportation supervisor. We did SWOT for option 3 as well. And just as with option 2, our strengths were historically underrepresented students compared with assigned in all 3 middle schools. And our weakness also was very low enrollment at Rosa, which would make it inequitable. We also found a weakness that may limit parental access to the school for families lacking transportation. We found absolutely no opportunities in this option, and our threats were obtaining and sustaining tiered routing, which may be a challenge of larger population of students transported from Kingston to Beck. That also will increase the time students may have to spend on a school bus, and it could be excessive. It's a barrier for parents and guardians who do not drive, and its inequitable distribution of students could cause classroom size concerns. At this time, I would like to introduce Lynn Bostickian and George Guy.
Thanks, Linda. Option 4 is the most unique of all of our options. It sends all grade 6 students to Rosa and grade 7 and 8 students to Beck and Carusi based on the distance of the elementary school and the middle school according to Google Maps. So as we look at option 4, as we said earlier, all 6th grade students would be at Rosa, and then for grade 7 and 8, grade student or 7 and 8 from Barton, Kilmer, and Kingston, and Knight and Payne would attend Carusi Middle School, and grade 7 and 8 from Cooper, Hart, Johnson, Mann, Sharp, Stockton, and Woodcrest would attend Beck Middle School. If we take a look at our projected enrollment, Rosa option 4, there is a concern as it relates to the capacity exceeding that capacity at 811. As we take a look at the 2020-2021 enrollment by race, we can take a look at how that would look for Rosa with all 6th graders and Carusi and Beck with 7th and 8th graders. Then we can take a look at the projected enrollment by race with Rosa with just 6th graders and Carusi and Beck with 7th and 8th graders. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Lynn Bostickian.
Thank you, Mr. Guy. So as you could probably see immediately, this is the most different option that we're presenting so far compared to the other models. I just want to walk you through the SWOT analysis. We could have in the next slide. Thank you. So if we look at the strengths of this, we identified several. We're seeing that this model or this option has the most minimal impact to the number of bus routes compared to the current middle school configuration for bus transportation for these students. Some students in grade 7 and 8, however, would also be able to spend less time on the bus. Of major significance is that historically underrepresented students would be comparably assigned to each of the 3 schools. Model also offers all special ed class programs in each school. Some of the weaknesses that we identified, again, the physical plant at Rosa, in terms of building capacity. There might be some longer bus rides for some sixth graders, which might increase the carbon footprint, which was something we did consider in all our discussions with each option. Opportunities. Thank you. Sixth grade, we thought in this model could reskill and upskill in preparation for upper middle school in terms of transitioning into middle level programs. There would be an expansion of the physical plan at Rosa to accommodate enrollment. All sixth grade students would be in the same building as opposed to the current selection process, which was one of the major considerations in the work we were doing. And sixth grade sports programs would be intramural in nature. In our threat column for this model or option is that there would be increased transitions for students, which might be difficult for many students. Enrollment projections are higher than Rosa's building capacity, which I know you've heard on several options so far, and this one includes that as well. There's a lack of space and enrollment for special class programs at Rosa with this, and there might be a significant impact to ESL staffing and services. This time, I would like to turn over option 5, which will be presented by Dr. Kwame Morton and Sean Sweeney.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sean Sweeney, principal of Clara Barton Elementary School. Dr. Morton and I are going to present on option number 5. Option number 5 is a variation of option 2, which was previously presented. For this option, the difference between option 2 is that Clara Barton Elementary School would essentially be split. Students who live north or south of Route 70 would either go to Rosa Middle School or Carusi Middle School. On the slide here for option 5, you can see the sending sections by middle school. Beck would be comprised of Cooper, Hart, Sharp, and Stockton. Carusi would be Barton, students that live north of Route 70. Kilmer, Kingston, Knight, and Payne. Rosa will be made up of Barton students who live south of Route 70, Johnson, Mann, and Woodcraft. Projected enrollments are also shown. Similar to what you've seen on the previous 4 option slides, this is a look at enrollment by race, comparing the 2020-2021 breakdowns at all 3 middle schools to the projected enrollment based on option 5. Same for economically disadvantaged, comparison from 2020-2021 to the projected for option 5. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Morton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sweeney. I am Kwame Morton, one of the assistant superintendents. So option 5, one of the primary strengths there is that we felt it greatly expanded the opportunities for diversity to be represented at each of our schools, with the historically underrepresented students being comparably distributed at all the schools. We definitely felt that that was a positive. One of the weaknesses, however, if you look at the enrollment numbers, there's a significant difference between the projected enrollments at Carusi when compared to Beck and at Rosa. And this directly contributed to the one threat that we have. And that threat is inequitable distribution of students could cause class size concerns and difference in experience. There were no opportunities listed there. And I believe I'll turn it over back to Ms. Weatherington.
Thank you, Dr. Morton. So you've heard of all 5 options that the committee reviewed in some level of detail. So now we'll move on to the committee's recommendations. So We recommended options 4 and 5 for the board's consideration, and I'll take you through each option. So for option 1, our primary concerns were the physical plant at Rosa and building capacity. What the building capacity does not take into consideration are the classrooms that we have allocated for special classes, which reduces the building capacity lower than what you're actually going to see on the slide. If the board chose to adjust the physical plant, we have another option that we think is more viable than option 1. Option 2, our concern is the enrollment at Rosa is significantly lower than that at Beck and Carusi, and there's just inequity built into those comparisons. It affects class size, it affects staffing. We didn't think that was a viable option. And option 3, comparable to option 2. The enrollment between Beck and Carusi is a little bit more comparable, but as compared to Rosa, it's really inequitable as far as number of students that are being served in each building. Option 4 was a viable option, according to our committee. If the board was willing to address the issues of physical plant, it's a great opportunity to create a really unique experience for 6th graders in our district. Option 5 was also a viable option and requires no changes to the physical plant at Rosa. The only concern with option 5 is that enrollment at Carusi is significantly higher than that at Beck and Rosa. So next steps, we have a thought exchange that we will be launching shortly after the meeting. We will have a community town hall on the 26th of January to solicit community feedback. And then the board will make determinations about boundary options in February for the start of the 23-24 academic year. And this is the QR code for the thought exchange. It's actually, I'm wrong, it's live now. Anyone can scan it and then provide us their comments. We're really interested in hearing the community's feedback and excited about the opportunities. So Dr. Malas, that's our presentation. Not sure if board members have questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Sweathington, and thank you to all the members of the committee. Ms. Sweathington, the time that you all spent as a group, both together in your large scale meetings going back to the summer, and then in between meetings with the research and the work that was done, we all very much appreciate. Mrs. Neary, I turn it over to you and see if board members have questions for members of the committee, clarification. I think one of the important things to highlight beyond all the information is this is going to be on an ongoing discussion. We don't expect that the board will take any action to do anything until February or the February board cycle at the earliest. We expect there will be ongoing discussion after this evening, at the committee of the whole on January the 11th, and then beyond that, especially at the town hall meeting, we've got scheduled a community town hall on January the 26th. So we will expect that there'll be ongoing discussion. So Mrs. Neary, I turn it over to you and see if some of the board members have questions for Mrs. Weathington in the group.
Thank you, Dr. Malash, and thank you to the committee for the hard work and presentation this evening. Did any board members have questions? Mr. Stratton?
My first question is, so in January, will it be whittled down to these 2 options for us to talk about, or will all 5 be on the table for us?
So honestly, it's really is up to what steps does the board want to take? What direction does the board want to travel to move forward? So it's really up to the board.
Okay, and then the other question was, for some of the threats for the 2 that are recommended, is it the committee's next steps to kind of see how we could tackle those threats before decisions are made, or proposed plan to tackle those threats before decisions would be made?
So part of the determining how to address the threats really needs to be narrowed down in terms of which options does the board want to move forward with, because it takes some very different directions to address the threats that exist. And before trying to do that for all the different options, or if the board says, we want to look more deeply at these 2, can you look at this 3rd one and see if there's something different, then we can go down those paths to do. But looking for additional guidance from the board about what, like I said, what direction do you want the committee to take at this point?
Definitely. I think that would make more sense not to do unnecessary work. So I definitely won't want the committee to do that. But thank you to the committee. This is really robust and detailed. And in terms of the thought exchange, is that going to just be open to our current communities, our current students populations? Since this doesn't take it won't take effect till 23, 24. Will it just be something that's open to all community members in general, or just the students that we currently have?
So yes, nothing will go, we don't expect that the board will take any action. Nothing will happen for September of 2022. The earliest that anything can happen will be September of 2023. Again, that's determined based upon the direction that the board decides to pursue. The thought exchange is open to anyone in the community. We do ask in the beginning of the thought exchange, there's an identifier, not by name, but we ask people to identify as your youngest child in elementary school, preschool, middle school, high school, or a community member that doesn't have any children in the district. So it's open to anybody in the community can weigh in.
Thank you. And Ms. Mayor, I'm sorry, one last thing. I guess it's kind of like strategic planning question as well. And Mr. Ovadio, maybe you could weigh in. Would it be any effects to, like, I know we were in talks of looking at where the lines are right now. I'm sure that might change some of these capacities a little bit. Is there a time that you guys will work with this committee at some point?
So from a strategic planning perspective, I think we've sort of ceded this to P&L to do this work. So this, in my view anyway, this would not come back to strategic planning. At this point, this is sort of a full board, but P&L would take the lead on it. But that's my 2 cents.
Okay, were there any other questions? Ms. Schultz?
I also want to echo my thanks to the committee for the thoughtful presentation, outlining the options, the strengths, the weaknesses. The only question I had is the option one, the concerns we had in option one with the building, and how I think I heard that the building may not be set up or appropriate for the needs of the students. I'm just trying to get better understanding of how those concerns would not be the same for option 4, and perhaps maybe they're not the same because option 4 is just going to be 6th graders and option 1 would be 6th, 7th, and 8th. But that was just my only question.
Mrs. Schultz, the concerns would be the same. They would not be different. But if the committee looked at both options and felt number 4 was a more desirable option from an equity perspective, from an opportunity perspective, than option 1. So if the board were going to go ahead and make changes to the physical plant, we would recommend doing that for option 4 as opposed to option 1.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, were there any other questions? Mr. Ovadia?
Yeah, thanks, Mrs. Neary. So I also wanted to echo the thanks to the committee for all the work on this. And this is great. 5, and you can imagine some iterations that would make this 10 or 15. But just a couple comments before we look at this again. Now, one of the things that's come up in the town hall we did nearly a year ago now, and just comes up in conversation at times, is when the committee is looking at making this recommendation, the kids who are currently in the school, what happens to them? Does this change happen right away or not? And I'll just go through all of my questions at once. And so the other thing is the timeline, right? So we had discussions, at least when strategic planning was still more in the mix of this, that we needed to give time for this to happen, not next year, but the year after. And yet our current timeline has the board making final determinations in February. It seems like, why not take a few more months, iterate things a little bit more. I don't know if the committee may feel that essentially the options are exhausted, and so why belabor it? But I'd like some feedback on that. I like the idea, we know that people feel strongly on this issue. Just looking at the attendance number today tells us some of that, and it's great that people can participate now. I think, the town hall is going to be critical. And I might even suggest we slate in an additional town hall. And we've done at least two, well, we're going to do two town halls for bond before there even is one, and then we'll have to do more. So it just seems like, this is a meaty issue. The other thing, I don't know, I'm geeking out with Val Smith-Shadwin over here, but are demographics in town like changing significantly? Because like, I'm just looking at, if we look at like option 3, and we look, for instance, through a lens of just economic disadvantage, it seems like, year over year, just the community, and this may be true, but I'm just saying, if there's a shifting demographic within town, like it would just be good to adjust for that year, because, all 3 schools are becoming more economically disadvantaged, I guess, a year or 2 later. And if that's the case, that's just good for us to be aware of and recognize that there is a movement in addition to the movement that we're doing. And then I just, with something like option 3, where the weakness is very low enrollment at Rosa, did we look at like splitting up a school like we do in, I think it's 5, to adjust for that? So I guess what I'm saying is, are the 5 options, this is the last question, I promise, are the 5 options the best options they could be? Or are they sort of iterative, where we could make them a little bit better, where something might come into a final, a final winners to be considered that isn't currently? So that's just a couple thoughts. But again, thank you for all the work that went in so far on this.
So, Mr. Badia, we went with February because we thought the board wanted to make a decision around that time frame. If that needs to be extended, I have no opinion about that one way or another. I would defer to Dr. Malash on that, but that was why we included that information. Additional town hall, again, I defer to Dr. Malash on that. Val can certainly address to an extent the shifting in the community. I don't know if she's ready to do that today, but at some point she probably could. I can't see her face from here, so. Okay.
If you look year to year, you don't see much shifting, but over time, absolutely there is shifting. And also what's interesting, and is part of the challenge, I think, here, is that if you look at census tracts, that the census tract information is very, very different. So people live in different places, have different characteristics. And so if you really want to be, to absolutely improve equity, you're talking, then you've got longer distances traveled and you're talking about active busing. But are things changing? Absolutely. But also census tract data shows that the census tract characteristics are much different.
Okay, and then I'll pick up the last one. These are the 5 best options that we could identify. We certainly had many conversations about different schools that may be split. It's very difficult in some of the schools to find what would that line of demarcation be, what would be a natural way to do that. Barton felt pretty natural with looking at 70 north and south, which is why we opted for that. In any of the options, there's always 5 more ways to split it and splice it. But these were the best that we found during our analysis.
Ms. Stern?
Thank you. Just first, I want to just thank all the people involved. This is a huge undertaking. It's a huge amount of work. It's a very big step, which we can see historically has not happened too often. So, just thank you so much. In a very hard year where there's a lot of change and a lot of transition and a lot of stress, this is just, really thank you so much for adding this into all the things you're doing and have done. So I have my list. One of my first questions is, there was no mention until the very end about the consideration of some of our students who are in have special needs or in special classes. And yet, given that they're 20% of our population, our student population, I'm just wondering, you know, what level of consideration we need to have. For instance, Mrs. Wethington mentioned, sounds like it's almost like a threat, the issue of like, when we look at in the SWOT analysis, this threat in the SWOT analysis of being truly having access to rooms for education and services for students. It's maybe not so realistic in terms of we have capacity, but then we also have like what programs are there. So where does special ed work into this? That's probably, I don't know if I just want to read them all, Mrs. Neary. Do you want me to just read off my questions and then we can kind of go one by one?
Yeah, I would do them all at once, and then I
Okay.
have some questions and thoughts as well.
Thank you. I also echo Mr. Ovadia's comment. We have 2 and potentially 3 new board members joining us early next year. I think the timeline is really compressed, given that, and also given historically that there was a 6-month timeline. Now, granted, that was from introducing the idea to finishing it, but I don't know. I would ask that suggest that we take more time in this, especially since the lottery is happening again this year. So we do have the time. I wondered if there are any concerns about Title I status being affected by this at Carusi, and if that, hopefully it's not affecting, because that's an important, resource for that school and for our students, but just wanted to know if that's a concern. Mrs. King was involved and talked about transportation. It's just such it's just a regular challenge and topic in the district, and it was definitely addressed. I just reading this, I was wondering if we're looking at, realistically, is this as big as it is, or is transportation even a bigger issue than do we need to have any other considerations regarding transportation? Because it's such a challenge right now. And I think, this is kind of going back to what Mr. Avadia said, when I look at kind of the priorities here, one of my great concerns is we don't want to overload any school capacity. I have a lot of priorities, but that's a big one, and that's one that the administration has as well. So when I look at like options, for instance, option 3, going back to option 3 is an example, because that's what's open on my screen. We look at BEC is pretty close to capacity. It's shy of capacity at the projected enrollment. So, when we have 2, 4, 5 schools sending to BEC, is there a way to consider shifting one of those schools perhaps? And I just throwing this out there, and this is just to my fellow board members, do we want to consider, we want to move one school over perhaps to Rosa? Is that going to get us to a little more balance with the capacity and have that not be a concern without necessarily splitting a school? Because I think that's really tough to split a single school, although I understand there's a good rationale to consider it. I definitely just want to echo the sentiments other board members have said, and tonight and other conversations. I think there's a lot of concern from the community about students being able to finish out their time in their current school, wherever they are, and specifically with Rosa, because that's the one that's probably going to most likely to change the most students with this change. And I definitely would want to be able to see students finish out their time in their current middle school, and not have to disrupt those kids' lives in that way. So I think that's it for now. I'm sure I'll think of more.
So, Ms. Stern, for purposes of this committee, this special education population of students were considered, certainly because they fall into the historically underrepresented category.
But as it relates to the data that we were looking at, it was difficult to kind of identify them because they're placed, IEPs drive programs. So from the lens of special education, as we looked at each option, the goal was always to find a way to equitably distribute programs to create more inclusive environments across schools and not necessarily have schools isolated to specific to specific parts of the district. So that's something that's kind of been on our radar. Sorry. That's something that's kind of been on our radar throughout each option. It was just difficult to kind of focus in on that as it related to individual students, if that makes sense for the data.
And then I can clarify for option 4, when you reference the threats, let me just explain what that means. If we were to create a 6th grade center, we would need to provide one option of every special class at Rosa as a 6th grade center, which would be a challenge because there are some programs where we have high populations. Learning and language disabilities is one. We have multiple classes in any given building. However, programs like multiply disabled, we have 2 classes with a low census in one school. So we may not have enough students for even a single class in a building at Rosa. So that would have to be a real consideration. You know, perhaps we would take tuition students. I don't know, but it's something we'd have to think about as a district, because if we had a program with 2 students in it, what would be the best way to operate that? So that was the rationale for that bullet, okay? All right, so then the timeline, certainly, again, I'm going to defer to Dr. Malash about the timeline. I think the board can take what it needs. Transportation was a significant challenge, which is why we asked Mrs. King to sit in with us, because she was the person always chirping in our ear saying, I'm sorry to say it again, but from a transportation perspective, that's not going to work. And we're like, okay, we defer to you. So she gave us great guidance on like what would work and what would not work, which is why some options just say it just may be prohibitive from a transportation perspective. Like it's just not viable because we cannot transport children. School capacity was an issue for us also. Again, we can certainly do what you'd like us to do. There's a challenge to moving schools around because for every move that you make, you're looking at populations and in some cases making buildings less equitable. And if the district's values are aligned with equity, then that's what we're trying to lead with. And we're certainly not trying to create schools that are not diverse.
Thank you, Ms. Weathington. Let me just say about the timeframe and the timeline, honestly, is up to the board, right? I mean, the timeline with which we've been working, you know, is based on the request that goes back to last spring. The discussions we had in the spring, what the charge was from the board for administration to put together. Mrs. Weathington, along with the committee, you know, have stuck to that timeline. There is no concrete date set in February when something has to be done. It can certainly go longer. We can certainly do additional town hall meetings. You know, that's up to the board and the time that the board, you know, the seated board now, the newly seated board in January, you know, and then in February, what that looks like. So that's completely up to the board.
Okay, thank you. And
I'm
I had a
sorry,
couple-
Mrs. Neary. I did have one more question. If I could just.
Sure.
Thank you. And this is actually from Mrs. Schmidt-Sadwin, who we got a chance to have some great information about how the data was collected, and it's definitely way above my pay grade to do that kind of work. So I really appreciate that you do that and you understand it all. One piece I did not see addressed was, and I'm just wondering if it comes into play, is I guess it's called, referred to as the GRIP study, which is the township-wide population study projected, which also was done pre-COVID, is my understanding. So I don't know how, you know, I think, I'm not sure if it's as relevant now as we thought it would be, but, you know, just wondering how that may or may not have fit into the data that you were looking at demographically.
I absolutely read the GRIP study multiple times. It's a very thorough, very, you know, he did a better job than I could ever do with a lot of resources that I didn't have. I then sit down and, because I do enrollment projections every year also. So I sat down with my data and compared it to his data. So it was absolutely thoroughly reviewed. But what I can work with is the data and the factors that I have. I felt comfortable that for the most part, like the vast majority of our numbers were agreeing completely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I had a couple comments, concerns, and then questions. So looking at all the options and then keeping equity in mind, looking at option 4, I'm concerned about the distribution of the economically disadvantaged come grades 7 and 8 being skewed to one school and what that looks like. Also taking that into account with the swell that we see at the one school in a lot of the options, actually, except for possibly option 3. We know that smaller class sizes are tied to better outcomes. So I would think for the large portion of economically disadvantaged, we would want to ensure that we could do that. So I'm wondering if that is something we think about when we're looking at the options and knowing that to be true, how we could ensure for that population, knowing that we have some challenges with transportation, but perhaps there is some value to option 3. And then also taking a look at any perspective thought on what that does to high school enrollment under the options. So not just options 4 and 5, but the others where, does that change the demographic? That's data we don't look at now, we don't have now to see, what children from these schools are trending to what high school. Because what we don't want to do is borrow another future problem and an unintended consequence, and we could potentially be further overburdening the one high school, which is something that we're challenged with. So that was something I didn't see, and it's something I think for the group to think about going forward is what of those options, what could be the impacts to the distribution amongst the high schools. So those were just some of my early thoughts, because this is a very complex issue. There's nothing simple about this, and I don't envy anyone, and I very much appreciate the effort in even trying to take a look at this. It is somewhat Herculean, so I very much appreciate that. But those were just a few of my early thoughts.
So, Mrs. Neary, we did have conversations about trending at the high school. I'm going to ask Mr. Guy to help me out, because I think we talked about the number of students at Rosa who are trending towards east or towards west. And we can certainly get more information on that, if that would be of interest.
Thank you, Mrs. Wethington. So currently in the 8 years that I've been there, we have seen a trend of more students heading to high school west, but that trend is not significant. We still have, I would say, between 75 to 80% of our students heading to high school east, with anywhere between 20, maybe 25 to 30%. And it may, when I came in 2014, 2015, it may have been 15%. So we are seeing a trend upward with more students heading to high school west, but it's still predominantly between 70 and 80% of our students will head to high school east.
Thank you. And I wonder, actually, in looking at that, and I know we haven't thought of it in these terms when you're thinking elementary, but it would be good to know which elementary schools are trending to which high school and how that impacts any of the work you're looking at the middle school level, as far as will that even be impactful, or is it a negligible number of students a year then, depending upon the mix that you're proposing? It just would be something good to look at now, because we don't even really, we don't know, but I'm sure the district does, as to, what elementary schools are actually really overall sending to Rosa versus others, and then could help give you an idea of what the impact would be based on the change to the high school.
I would just add that Mr. Guy and his team have done a really bang up job recruiting across the district. Rose is pretty well distributed among all the elementary schools in the district. And that has been a change in the past, I'd say 4 to 5 years.
Thank you. Did anybody else have any other questions? Ms. Schultz?
Sorry, I just have one final question in regards to timelines. So given that the Rosa Lottery is valid, I guess, per the policy that we just voted on for 1 more year, is there a date that you would need a decision or estimated date that the committee is looking for from the board on a recommendation? And then if, I guess, if we extend beyond that, then would we be looking at the board meeting to revise that policy? I'm just trying to kind of get an understanding of what that, from a timeline perspective, what is that rough estimated date that you're going to need a final recommendation to kind of implement a change of this magnitude?
So sooner rather than later is always better in terms of planning and preparation and the opportunity to share information with the community, with staff, with family members, with the students on one side, right, in terms of the communicative piece. On the other side, looking at if the board would need to, again, go in and revise the open enrollment policy to reinstate the selection process about this time next year. It would need to be done so that, again, it could be announced and information would be put out there. There is not the same urgency now if a change wasn't announced by the springtime. If no change was announced by the springtime about how children were going to be assigned to the middle schools, then my recommendation to superintendent would be that nothing would take place until 2024 at the earliest. Because again, with significant change, planning needs to take place, organization needs to take place, people need to be prepared for what goes on. So that's really the only thing is about if and when the changes are going to be put in, when they would take place. So pushing it back farther just pushes back when it would be implemented. But again, rolling it out, planning for it, making that announcement, we can certainly put that out for everybody that's there.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Avadia?
Thank you. So just now that I've really thought about Mrs. Elmore Stratton's question a little bit more, what's our degree of concern with this max projected number? I see us in the presentation dampening what that means, but in our bond, in our 20-year projection, should we be considering adding some instructional space in the next 20 years of growth potentially? I mean, I guess if we're going to do it, or if we think that that's prudent, that should be something that we kind of communicate to Mr. Garrison, et cetera.
We can certainly take a look at that. The state is not likely to look favorably upon adding spaces based on projections. They tend to want to see that, you have unhoused students prior to giving you the permission to add additional educational spaces.
Ms. Stratton?
Thanks, Mr. Avadia. I think that's why I was originally asking is, do we need to be looking at all these before we make a change? But just my thoughts on the timeline part of it, and I'm glad Ms. Schultz asked, like, what we would need to set ourselves as a drop dead, make a decision by for the administration to prepare properly. Because I understand what Mrs. Stern said about the new board members coming on, but that's going to always be happening. And so we can't just kick the can down. We want to make sure that we give administration enough time to be fully prepared. So I wouldn't want to see us projecting this further and further down the line. So we probably should have an exact date on when we need to say, at this point, we've got to make a decision so that they can be best prepared.
So if we would want additional town halls, I think we need to make that decision or as soon as possible. And then, because right now I'm processing everything and I'd really rather hear or need to hear from the community to see what the impact and what they even perceived as this presentation and how they've taken in the information. Ms. Schultz, the question about the timeline, even implementation and process on how families are going to then transition to whatever model that's selected, that's also a process. So I'm just, it's a lot of information. I think we just need to take a minute to go through all that, but definitely extend the conversations with community a little bit more. Because remember, we're working on several big things right now. So we need to make sure that each one gets proper attention. And so one town hall, I agree. I don't think that's enough. I think the thought exchange is going to be great, hearing feedback, just making sure that everybody in the community continues to support and provide all the information feedback, because this is a major, options 4 and 5, I can see benefits in both, but it's still overwhelming. And I wasn't prepared for this much information today. I knew this was happening, but I just looking at it and seeing the process of what's about to happen is a lot. So I'd rather add more conversations if possible, really look at the deadline that we need to face if we have to adjust the policy for one more year, if that's something that we need to consider, but make those decisions as soon as possible.
To that point, Mrs. Arroyo, we also had to be concerned with fatiguing the community too. Yes, we need community impact and community input rather, but we don't want to fatigue them with survey after survey, thought exchange after thought exchange, town hall after town hall, because at some point we're going to stop getting the responses that we really want, because people are just going to be over inundated with the question of what do you want. So, but again, I agree. If we would like the administration to put more town halls in, let's as a board ask that now so they could plan for that and not say that in January or February.
Again, I can add, we can always add more town halls, right? So we have, just remind the board, we have board meetings every Tuesday night in January, the 4th, the 11th, the 18th, and the 25th. We have a town hall scheduled for the 26th. This month, we could try to put one on in December. The challenge in December, we have a town hall scheduled for next Wednesday, which is the 15th. We have a board meeting that's scheduled for the 21st. We have evening concerts at the middle schools and the high schools that are going on now between now and winter break. So this is a tight time between now and the winter break from school. January, we can certainly look at the calendar. If the board, is inclined to do that, we can look at February. We can provide some dates. Mrs. Wilson and Mrs. Wellington and I can certainly sit down tomorrow and provide some dates for the board to look at. And that's up to the board. Is how you want to do it, how often you want to meet. There will also be additional discussions that are taking place in January as the projects are identified for a referendum that we expect to go out for next September. So those discussions will be occurring at the same time.
Ms. Stern?
So just a few things to throw out to my fellow board members. First of all, we definitely have been in situations before where we were considering different timelines, and we've given ourselves the time we needed in other discussions, and I think that makes sense. And I also understand the need to find balance with that and not push it out too far. So, thought I'm having is, what if we gave ourselves to make a decision in April? So if it was April, that would still give us, we're still way before the end of the year. We still have plenty of time before the open enrollment changes, but it does give all of us, it gives all of us time to sit with the information and consider different options. It gives our new board, incoming board members time to kind of onboard a little more. And perhaps it buys us time to consider a second town hall in February, when the community also has had more time to digest it, because we got a lot of feedback about a lot of community members who were disappointed that they wouldn't be able to attend this tonight, or observe it tonight, and give feedback. So, maybe it just kind of answers all of those pieces. So that's one thought. The other thing I want to throw out, again, to kind of fellow board members as we're all absorbing this information is, this is a huge presentation with a lot of hard work put into it. And then it's brought to us to figure out what we want to do with it. If there's a few options that we're narrowing in on, but perhaps we want to consider tweaking a little bit, maybe we need to provide that feedback back to the administration and say, back to the committee, is there a way that you could relook at this piece? And I think if we're giving ourselves a little more time, we would be able to do that. So I know for myself, I keep going back to, the piece about equity is so huge. And, can we still achieve equity and also make sure our building capacity is not going over? Because I'm very concerned about that topic. I'm very concerned about the impact to the students, to the staff, when there's a lot more people in the building and they're, the impact that has on a lot of aspects of education, that's a pretty big one to me. So, again, I had option 3 open up this whole time that I keep looking at. We have, perhaps if one of the schools is moved out of, if one of the schools was moved out and put into, one of the elementary schools was moved to, let's say, from the Beck to Rosa, is that possible with transportation? And then, would that work enrollment wise? Because looking at these schools, some of them are very high enrollment and some are much lower enrollment at the elementary level. So maybe that would buy us, it would find that balance that we're, at least I know I'm looking for.
Thank you, Ms. Stern. Is there any other comments or questions? Ms. Matlack?
I just wanted to thank the committee for the work that they did.
Thank you, Ms. Matlack. Ms. Tong?
Yes, I have I have to comment and compliment the committees putting this together, like what Carol says. And the other thing is, I think we need more time to digest this, and hopefully this will be benefiting the student with less disruptions. And other community members or parents that are unable to make it tonight due to other, I think, conflicts of schedule something, give them some time and we can get some feedback from them. That's all I have to say. Thank you to everybody putting the input in.
Thank you, Mrs. Tong. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay, thank you. That'll bring us now to administrative reports, and I'll turn it to Dr. Malash.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. There are no additional administrative reports tonight. We will have additional administrative report at the December 21st meeting. Dr. Morton will provide that evening an update on the Road Forward Committee. The committee will have met again prior to our next board meeting. So there are no additional reports tonight.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Malash. That'll bring us then to correspondence. Did any of the board members have correspondence this evening? Oh, Ms. Schultz?
Thank you. So December 1st, I attended my final mental health task force committee. It was at 9 o'clock. So I definitely want to give a special thank you to Miss Bonnie Minjin, who holds such a fantastic committee, and a thank you for allowing me to attend. So I just a note to the board, if somebody will put their name out there to attend this committee moving forward. It is fantastic, and want to make sure we continue to get the updates out to the community. So we covered 3 topics. The first was Ms. Minjin did a review of the, I guess, the session that was recorded just about, I think it was a little over, Ms. Wellington, about a week ago for the community. Yep, so roughly about a week ago, but the great news is if you were unable to attend it, those sessions were recorded and all of our parents will have access. So in attendance was Effective School Solutions, Care Solace, Newport Academy, New Penn, and Assurance Behavioral Health Care, and the Cherry Hill Fire Department. So it was a panelist of all of the resources that are available to our community. So again, if you were unable to attend that great panelist that was available, that session was recorded and you will have access to that. The next thing that was discussed was the offerings that will be available through Thrive. This is in particular going to be 2 parent trainings, and this is going to be in particularly geared towards our younger population in the district. So what we're going to be focused on first is the impact of social media on mental health, and then how to navigate cyber community, because we are starting to realize that no isn't the answer, as this is now the avenue that children are connecting and communicating with. So those are the first two. This will be available in January, so look for this. There is also the intent to do a survey with the parents of this younger population to ask for topics that Thrive will be looking to cover in the spring. And then the last thing that we talked about was Cole Hooley from UPenn did come on and talk about staff burnout and some of the things that we're going to be looking to do for our staff across the district. There will also be a survey that goes out to the staff to just get a kind of a pulse on what they would be looking for. And so some things that were kind of discussed were 20-minute breaks during the day, group meetings, support from their peers, private meetings, focus groups. And then the last thing that was suggested was even short yoga and meditation classes and things that you can do at your desk to kind of help relieve some of the staff burnout throughout the district. So that was also very informational, and some information that was passed on from our partners at UPenn. So overall, it was a very great meeting. And that was the update for this mental health committee meeting. So with that, if there's any questions, I will do my best.
Ms. Schultz, thank you for attending those meetings. I know you said this was your last one, so we appreciate you being a steady person coming in and reporting back to us on that.
Thank you, Ms. Stratton.
Thank you, Mrs. Schultz. Did anybody have any questions for Ms. Schultz? Okay, was there any other correspondence? Ms. Tong?
Yesterday, December 6th, I went to the AAPI rally. The event is well attended by a lot of committee members. Dr. Malash and Ms. Barbara Wilson was there, and our town mayor, Susan Guerrero, and town council Shankita Doshi, and other leaders, and quite a lot of students also speak out at that event. The purpose of that rally was to ask the local official assembly to immediately pass the A6100, which required the history and contribution of Asian Americans to be taught in schools. This is already passed by the state Senate. New Jersey will be the second state. Over the last few years, Asian Americans have been targeted. The most recent one was the 4 Asian American students on the Philadelphia SEPTA train. In New Jersey, anti-Asian has surged 74% since 2020. We need to prevent and stop the surge of this anti-Asian attack that plagues the country. So I hope this will be, I think Dr. Malash, if you have anything to say, you please add on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tong. Yes, it was a wonderful event organized by community members. Jessica Kim, who's also a parent here in the district, and Daniel Park did a wonderful job of putting it together in a very short amount of time. As Mrs. Tong said, the mayor was there and spoke. Assemblywoman Lampett, who's also the chair of the Assembly Education Committee, was there, and she committed to introducing the bill, which has already passed the Senate, to the Assembly Education Committee this week. The mayor spoke, Sangita Doshi, one of our council people, spoke. Representative from the governor's office spoke, as well as a couple of representatives from state organizations. It was a great day to see that many people together in such a short amount of time. I had the opportunity to reiterate the district's commitment to inclusivity and to highlighting, recognizing the diversity that's brought to our community, and specifically in this instance, focusing on the beautiful diversity of the Asian community that's here in Cherry Hill. In conversation with Mrs. Wethington and Dr. Mahan and Dr. Morton, I know that as we continue to look at our social studies classes and standards, that this is something that is actively being done, work that has begun in the district and will continue to go on. So we're looking forward to additional materials being available and continuing to partner with those folks in the community who are directly involved.
Thank you, Dr. Malash and Ms. Tong. Mr. Avadia?
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. So two things. So one, I attended the final meeting of the year for Camden County Educational Services Commission on December 1st. So I've been, well, one of the things that we did is we as we'll do in this forum, we did a fond farewell in that forum to two really longtime serving members of the board of directors, so 8 and 20 years. Wow. The next meeting is February 2nd, but what I wanted to say is I've served on this for about 2 years. If anyone does have an interest in the commission, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. It's certainly a worthwhile endeavor to have a representative, and yet, you know, you have to share the wealth. But anyway, great group. Their next meeting will be in February. We skipped the January cycle, but that. And then I was also, separate meeting, the Cherry Hill Special Education PTA had asked to meet with Mr. Garrison. And so we had quite a few administrators and we had 3 board members. So it was Ms. Stern, Ms. Friedel, and myself. And we sat down for about, well, virtually, for about an hour last Friday. And a lot of really good concerns were brought up. Because of what had happened in terms of the timeline, it did seem to make sense at that meeting to do a separate thought exchange, which was published and disseminated to families with students with IEPs and 504. So that data would be coming through. But it was a really good engagement, a lot of specificity in terms of concerns and ideas, and it was well presented. And so you know, Bob as always did Bob's thing, but it's really good to engage in that way as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Avadia. Did anybody else have any other correspondence? Okay, that'll bring us then to our first public comment. And the first public comment is for action items only, items 17 through 20 to be voted on. As usual, please state your full name, your municipality, and the agenda item you will be speaking on. And we'll start with those in the audience and then move to the line. If there are any students, they can go ahead and speak at the first public comment.
Hello, my name is Sophia Gaudio and I am a 6th grade student at Rosa International Middle School. I just want to address my concerns about the potential change to the Rosa Raptor family. When this change goes into effect, my fellow 6th grade classmates and I will be in 8th grade, meaning that we might be separated and not be able to graduate together. Those of us who attend Rosa feel like a family because Rosa is smaller than the other middle schools. Plus, all of us felt strongly about wanting to go to Rosa, so that is why we entered the lottery to begin with. Those of us who are currently in 6th grade lost out on our last 2 years of elementary school due to COVID shutdowns and remote school most of the last 2 years. Though COVID is still here, we have been able to regain that family feel, and we would have been together for 2 years and then separated and forced to graduate without most of our friends. Imagine how hard that will feel for us moving to a new school just before you graduate 8th grade and then again the very next year for high school. I'm just asking you please choose one of the options that will not separate the current Rosa students when this change takes effect. Thank you for letting me speak about my concerns.
Thank you, Sophia. Okay, next we have on the line a number. Please state your full name, municipality, and agenda item.
I suppose that's me. My name is Jeff Podowitz. I live in Cherry Hill. The item number is 18.2, transfer current year surplus to capital reserve. That is $9.7 million being transferred to capital reserve fund. 9.7 million being transferred to our capital reserve fund is approximately 4.2% of our revenue net of transfers for the 2021-2022 school year based on our 2021-2022 user-friendly budget that can be found on the DOE website. If you Google search CAFR plus New Jersey plus 2021, you will find a list of comprehensive annual financial reports. The latest available in the DOE website for Cherry Hill was for the fiscal year ending July 30th, 2020. That year, $12 million was placed in that capital reserve fund. That $12 million placed in the capital reserve fund was approximately 6% of our district's actual revenue net of transfers. Again, on the user-friendly budget, 4.2% and 6%, $9.7 million and $12 million are not a trivial amount of money. School board, please review page 65 of that report of this of our fiscal year, July 1st, 2019 to June 20th, 2020. Questions. Our $9.7 million, is it from a surplus during this fiscal year starting July 20th to June 30th, 2021? The CAFR report for fiscal year ending 2021 is not yet available on the New Jersey DOE website. What were the deposits approved by the board and the withdrawals from the capital reserve account for that fiscal year? Could any of this $9.7 million be spent or going to another item? And that's something I'm going to ask. Is there a better way to spend $1 million of those dollars? A different way to spend it? Or $2 million? Anyway, thank you very much. And that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Podowitz. I don't see any other members in the audience. Okay, hold on one moment.
Hi, Rick Short, Cherry Hill. I'd like to talk about item 13.1 under the wages.
It's action items 17 through 20.
Okay.
13
sorry.
would be second public comment. No problem. Okay. Then we'll go to Karen Bell on the line.
Hi, I'd like to speak about the reconfiguration of the schools. I don't know what number
That
it is.
would,
though.
oh yeah, that's not one of the items being voted on this evening. So that would be second public comment.
Then I would like to mute again and try again later.
No problem. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other public comment for first public comment. So that will bring us now to our committee of the whole agenda, and we'll start with curriculum and instruction, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Matlack.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. We have two items tonight. One is the course of study booklet overview, and the second is the play production at West for the spring. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Mahan to go over both of those with us.
It's actually going to be Dr. Morton today.
Thank you, Dr. Morton.
Even Dr. Mahan's voice got a lot deeper.
Yes, it did.
All right, anyway, so we're amid the course of study process, the revision process. So it's an annual process in which we update the course of study booklet as we introduce new courses and take a look at where we are and where we're trying to go as a district. The course of study process is a collaborative process traditionally, and it's been that way this year as well. This process typically includes the feedback and voice of administrators in the field, teachers, and in particular this year, students. As part of our new course proposal process this year, we actually are presenting a number of new courses with a specific focus. So a couple of those courses are focused in CTE. It will allow us to expand CTE offerings and provide, post-secondary pathways for students. But also we're looking to expand our STEM offerings for students as well. And I'm really proud this year that both schools, in association with Mr. Scott Goldthorpe, our supervisor for science at the secondary level, facilitated a survey which they sent out to students to ask students what they were interested in learning about in science and the STEM area. In total, there were over 1,500 students that participated in that survey and provided feedback. And they identified the courses that they wanted to take and they wanted to see in effect. And we were able to put those forward. So it's a true opportunity and true example of student voice at its finest at work. So kudos to Mr. Goldthorpe and to the science staff that facilitated that process. So the timeline that we've been following, new course proposals were due at the end of October. We filtered those out and vetted them and identified those that will move forward. We're still immersed in the course of study revision process. So we're updating dates and updating the guide itself to reflect what will be offered next year. Course descriptions are in the process of being updated as well. The course of study booklet in its draft form will be presented at the January 11th board meeting. That's the expectation now. And we plan to have a digital version of the book available and online January 15th, all right, for everyone to view. In terms of, again, post-secondary pathways, we're looking to expand CTE offerings. So there were two CTE sequences that will go forward. I'll talk more about those, I guess, in January when the book comes forward. But again, we're also excited about the opportunity to increase exposure to STEM at the high school level. Mr. Goldthorpe, who I believe is seated right in front of me, I can't see him, but I'm going to ask him to come up to the podium. Perfect, there you go. Mr. Goldthorpe and I, we've spent the last several weeks visiting all of the secondary schools and taking a look at not only the new electives that are being taught, but also at the middle school level, what's happening with our students as it relates to science and STEM. And we've been excited. We're so excited that we had to share some of the things that have been observed with you. So Mr. Goldthorpe, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Morton. My name is Scott Goldthorpe, one of the supervisors of curriculum and instruction. So I put together a short presentation about how we're increasing opportunities for our high school STEM program, right? And really removing barriers and increasing access and opportunity for students in high school STEM. So I wanted to start with this quote that I often go back to, and I've shared it with you guys on the board before. It says, in the 21st century, scientific and technological innovations have become increasingly important as we face the benefits and challenges of both globalization and a knowledge-based economy. To succeed in this new information-based and highly technological society, students need to develop their capabilities in STEM to levels much beyond what was considered acceptable in the past. So I use that quote to really drive the work that we're doing here and thinking about how can we increase the capabilities to levels that were considered acceptable in the past. So thinking about that, I'm going to take us on a journey back in time about 5 years ago to June of 2016 and highlight where we were. So at the time, there were about 1,300 students that were taking a STEM elective at our high schools. That represented about 37% of our student population. At the time, there were 17 STEM electives. 6 of them were AP level, and about slightly over 580 students participated in those 6 AP STEM electives. So now taking us to where we currently are, so this data is accurate as of yesterday. We have slightly over 2,500 students taking a STEM elective, which accounts for approximately 74% of our student body. We have 32 STEM electives that we offer to our students, 11 of which are AP, and 777 students are enrolled in those AP courses. So this is really what I'm excited to share is over the past 5 years, if we think about that, 1,260 more students are currently taking STEM electives. The percent of students taking a STEM elective has doubled. We've added 15 new STEM electives over the past 5 years. And we had a 33% increase in the number of students enrolled in our AP STEM electives. So that's really, really amazing work that, that we have done as a community to bolster STEM education in Cherry Hill. What's showing on the slide now are all of the different courses that we offer. So we've got a number of semester elective courses that are offered to 9th through 12th graders with no prerequisites. So we've tried to remove barriers to those courses and have them open and accessible to as many students as possible. Additionally, we've got a slew of full year electives ranging from research in science, vertebrate anatomy, environmental science, AP environmental science, computer programming, advanced topics in computer science, AP statistics. So I'm not going to read through all of those courses, but just so you get a full idea of what course offerings we have. You might say, like, Scott, how is this possible? How did we increase 1,200 students taking these electives? How did we double the percent of students taking STEM electives? And it really goes to what's going on in our schools on a daily basis, in the classrooms, with the teachers that are designing and creating those meaningful learning experiences for students every day. So I'm gonna take us on like a quick tour. I had the opportunity I guess it was last Thursday, it was day 5, and I visited the high schools. So I'm like, let me get some pictures and see what's going on in our high school classes that I could share with everybody. So I'm really excited to share these pictures here. This is from Mr. Grillo's biology class. They're investigating the mutualistic relationship between algae and hydra. Super cool things going on there. In Miss Castellani's AP bio class, students are investigating how different light intensities affect the rate of photosynthesis. In chemistry, we have students, they're looking at the aurora borealis and trying to make sense of that and figure out what causes that. And then in turn, they're looking at, periodic trends of conductivity and trying to really figure out what's causing that aurora borealis. This photo is actually pretty cool. So this was a mixture between our chemistry classes and our intro to engineering classes. Students are kind of taking these random materials and trying to figure out a way to generate enough electricity to charge a cell phone. So that was in chemistry, they were learning about these chemical reactions and then applying that in the intro to engineering course. Super cool. Next, I had the opportunity to chat with Ms. Freundlich. She was super excited to share in her forensics class. Students are using this transecting baseline coordinate method to collect measurements and create sketches of a crime scene. Following along on this tour in Ms. Sasinski's forensics class, I walk in, students are lifting fingerprints and analyzing those fingerprints. I felt like I was walking into CSI Las Vegas in that class. So cool. Our robotics course, this is one of the courses that we began offering last school year. So this is in Ms. Sanzari's class, students designing and building the claw bots to be able to move blocks and balls around a predetermined field. I actually have a couple slides from Physics A. So this was in Mr. Duffield's class. I didn't get to see this one, but he was so excited. He's like, let me send you some pictures. I'm like, awesome. Students are investigating Newton's second law, and they designed some little egg houses to participate in an egg drop. And this student was clearly successful in their design. Also in the Physics A class, moving into the second unit of study, students are trying to figure out how we can get to Mars. They're looking at Kepler's law of planetary motion and figuring out the location of Mars and all of the different ideas that are needed to be able to get to Mars. Moving along in Ms. Tan's AP Physics class, students are using this force table and working on calculating vector additions. Super cool hands-on activities that just excite kids. Then this is funny. So I go visit the computer science class. I'm like, hey, Miss Begley, can I take a picture of some of the things our kids are working on, and it's literally 25 kids sitting at computers writing code. So I do have a picture of that, and she's like, well, you know, you could also take a look at this. We're using the 3D printer to create little lion figurines, because next week is Computer Science Week, and we're going to give these figurines out to students after they compete in hour of code competitions. Mr. Frost's design class, they're designing and constructing buildings and observation platforms that are able to be built on irregular surfaces. So these are some of the pictures of the designs that the students have come up with. Moving along to sports medicine, this is in Ms. Castellani's class. The students learned how to apply tape to prevent hyperflexion of the wrist and lateral ligament sprains. Vertebrate anatomy, I had the opportunity to spend a good deal of time in Mr. Troutman's class over at High School East. And students there, they're examining the similarities and differences between mud puppies and frogs. Super, super engaging. I spoke to one student and she's like, this is my dream course. So it was a great opportunity there. Then I went up to Miss Breen's environmental science class, and students are investigating convection currents and how those convection currents inside the Earth impact Earth's surface. Then we go to Intro to Engineering, which it always seems like this class spills out into the hallway. So like you don't have to look too far for the Intro to Engineering class. Students are designing and then optimizing solutions to different problems that they're faced with. In the marine biology course, this is one of the new courses that we just started offering this school year. It's one of the semester courses that's open to 9th through 12th graders. Students are exploring the touch tank system and the tools that they're going to use to measure and maintain pH, temperature, and specific gravity. And then from climate science to action, I actually didn't get to go on the field trip, but Mr. Vernaccio over at High School East had shared these pictures with me. Students had done some investigations to measure the effect of carbon dioxide and how that impacts atmospheric temperature. And then they went on some field trips to see the real world impacts of increased carbon dioxide and atmospheric pressure or temperature. And last but not least, in our infectious disease course, one of the more highly subscribed courses that we just implemented, students are working with gene editing technology and antibiotic resistance in modeling those different processes. So overall, I know that was a lot. It was about 25 slides, but I wanted to give you the experience of visiting the high schools on one of the day 5 long periods to see all of the amazing work that's going on day in and day out in those classes. And it's really these experiences that are driving our success in the programs in STEM.
Fantastic. Great job, Mr. Goldorf. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Goldthorpe. That was a fascinating look at what's going on in our schools. It really was. We don't often, as board members, get a chance to see that. So thank you.
Absolutely. That was exactly our perspective and the thinking when we shared that. I know there are questions perhaps about what's happening around STEM, and that was just one day of the visit in one day. So there's so many wonderful things happening. We don't always have a chance to celebrate and talk about those things. We internally have an opportunity to see what's happening. So we want to take every opportunity possible to share. I know it's a long night tonight, so I thank everybody for bearing with us. There will be specific information given about the new courses. We'll talk specifically about what those courses are and what they will look like and moving forward. As I mentioned, there's the foci with STEM and CTE, so that will be done in January. Are there any questions around this presentation or science before I move on to the next piece?
Ms. Stratton?
Okay, can you just tell me CTE stands for? Thank you.
Oh, career and technical education. Any other questions?
Ms. Stern.
Thank you. So that was really exciting. And unfortunately, my brain is just, it's really going. So I'm going to let myself geek out a little bit and ask a couple questions. Just very exciting to see. And I think, you know, we've talked a lot about kind of big picture 21st century learning. You know, it's great to see the direction that we're moving in. And, you know, obviously, Mr. Grotha, Ms. Dr. Morton, Dr. Mahan, you know, this is just absolutely directly related to all of your hard work and the staff. I think about how this connects in a larger way to extracurriculars. You know, so much great stuff is going on in these classrooms, and, you know, are we connecting that to the areas our students are have growing interest in? So, you know, I attended, and I mentioned this at a previous meeting, the New Jersey School Board Association has the STEAM Tank Challenge, which is something that it offers districts to work with districts on becoming part of solving a real world problem with STEAM. And there's mentorship there and it's competition. It's pretty exciting. I'm just wondering if that would tie really nicely into the effort to increase our STEM interest and offerings. I looked at I was watching the potato effort to generate energy from potatoes. And to me, that's like, they talked about the STEAM Tank Challenge, how to, you know, find ways to kids to challenge themselves to charge batteries on school buses. What could they use that they have at home to generate battery charge? So, I mean, I love if that's something the board wants to support moving forward with getting, you know, connecting through NJSBA for that. And I also wonder just, I think about, we often talk about like all that exciting stuff at the high school level. And I'm just wondering too, like how that connects with stuff we're doing at the lower levels in terms of introducing more and more of that into that curriculum too, which may not be for tonight, but it's something that was on my mind when we were talking. So very, very exciting. And thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Tom.
I just want to comment to thank you. Who was this guy?
Mr. Goldthorpe.
Mr.
Yeah.
Goldberg for his presentation. It's very interesting. And I think it's one of the most interesting that being on the board for 3 years. I think it's the most interesting that I see and presenting our student, how we're doing, how our students progressing. I like to see more of that in occasionally so that we can see how, you know, are we in the direction, how we can help our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Avadia.
Yes, thank you. Just two quick comments. One, Dr. Morton, what was the stat about additional CTE courses and student choice? It seemed really great and I just couldn't absorb it.
Yeah, so I mentioned that we have, we're looking to introduce a couple of CTE pathways. That was one comment, but the other piece was in identifying the courses that we would run for next year, we'd include under our STEM options, under the direction of Mr. Goldthorpe and the administrative teams at both high schools, surveys were administered to the students to identify what they were interested in taking. There were a number of different courses that, you know, they were able to select from, and it was taken by over 1,500 students. And it was pretty clear what the students were interested in. I'm gonna create some suspense here and say I'll share that and share what those courses were in January. But it was a great process that was used this year. Truly phenomenal process and a wonderful reflection of how student voice should impact what we're offering and how we're moving forward.
Sounds great. Thank you.
We'll look forward to hearing that in January. Dr. Morton. Any other questions? Mrs. Stern?
Thank you. I wonder, could we get copies of those presentations that were shown tonight? Maybe in our Friday memo or put into the committee folder?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, and I have one other piece. There is a theatrical production coming from High School West. The show dates February 4th, 5th, and 6th. The show is called Radium Girls. And I'll just read a bit of a description. Written with warmth and humor, Radium Girls is a fast-moving, highly theatrical ensemble piece for 9 to 10 actors who play more than 30 parts. Radium Girls offers a wry, unflinching look at the peculiar American obsession with health, wealth, and the commercialization of science. And this is the West description. Cherry Hill West selected Radium Girls for its play to give the student actors an opportunity to perform in a fast-moving drama. The ensemble piece is written for 9 to 10 actors, but can be expanded to give more opportunities to students as well. The play has strong parts for both men and women actors that will allow them to grow in their ability to perform. The play is set in the 1920s, which will give the stage crew and the costume crew an opportunity to research and design the looks of that time period. Radium Girls will give the students participating in the production, as well as the audience, a chance to experience the true story of the women who were exposed to radium in the factories and their brave and groundbreaking battle to strengthen workers' rights for women. Questions?
Thank you, Dr. Morton. If you could just, for our newer board members, the process that the team goes through each time a play is presented for administrative approval, then therefore it comes to the board after it goes through that. There's a whole form, certainly not detailed, but that there are specifics in that each have to meet.
Yes, absolutely. So there is a formal review process. The schools are asked to submit the full play production, play script rather. They fill out a form where they identify if anything will be controversial, any topics or any particular scenes that is then submitted to me. I read through the entire script. Once I approve, I would send that on to Ms. Weatherington, who then reads it as well and gives her comments. And if she approves, then it's sent to the final, Dr. Malash. He reads through it and approves as well. So there's a multi-tier process, a system of checks and balances to ensure that what's being put forward is appropriate for our students and something that would, hopefully avoid controversy, but also be impactful for our community.
Thank you for explaining that. So I'll open it up if any board members have any questions. I don't see any. Thank you, Dr. Morton.
Thank you.
That's all we have, Mrs. Neary.
Thank you, Ms. Matlack. Okay, that will then bring us to business and facilities, and I will turn that over to Mrs. Schultz.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. We do have a few things to discuss tonight, so I will turn it over to Ms. Sugars to take us through the handful of items on our agenda.
That's going to be a tough act to follow. Talking about budgets and audits. But just a few highlights. Similar to last year, typically at this meeting, the auditor comes and speaks to the board about the annual audit. And similar to last year, the audit has been delayed. And so the deadline is now February 5th of 2022. And I expect that we will see the auditors probably at some point in January or February to come to speak to the board about our annual financial report. Speaking of which, the name has been changed of our annual financial report from the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, or as we used to call it, the CAFR, has now been changed to the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, which is the ACFR. That's going to take a little bit of getting used to. But this change was made in response to concerns raised by stakeholders that the common pronunciation of the acronym for the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report sounds like a racial slur. So this statement's introduction of this new term is founded on a commitment to promote inclusiveness. So our Comprehensive Annual Financial Report will now be called the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. Also on the agenda tonight, you will see that we are adding additional funds into the capital reserve account. As you know, in June, we passed a resolution to authorize a certain amount to go into our capital reserve account. This year, that was $7 million, and we're able to add an additional $2.7 million to that. So that will be approved that will be approved so that we can go ahead and move those funds. We do this annually every year, and it has allowed us the opportunities to do many of the capital projects that we have done throughout the district. And so, that's something that we do annually. We typically put a certain amount in June and then adjust it after the audit is completed. The other thing is that we have been able to maintain a 4% unreserved fund balance. This was one of our goals when we put our budget together last year. State typically only allows us to have a 2% fund balance. So when I say 2%, I'm talking about 2% of the previous year's expenditures. But with some of the issues that were brought on by the pandemic, we were able to maintain a 4% fund balance. Just to give you some perspective, a 2% fund balance is about the size of a payroll for us. So, and being able to maintain a 4% fund balance certainly helps us from a cash flow standpoint, and also make sure that there's funds available in the event of an emergency. This is only supposed to be for 2 budget years, but I understand there is some legislation to make it a permanent change that's being proposed. As you know, we're in the process of developing our 2023 budget. Our input from all of our principals and supervisors and departments is due by December 17th. And this will allow us to start our initial budget discussions with the board on January 25th. Just a couple of budget stats that I wanted to remind you of. We had this conversation back in February when we talked about parallel paths. So just kind of wanted to review a few items as we are in the process of developing the budget. 72% of our budget is designated for personnel in the form of salaries and benefits. The remaining 28% of the budget encompasses everything that is not salaries and benefits. So this includes out-of-district tuition placements, transportation, professional fees, utilities, liability insurance, copier leases, and district software programs like Genesis and Board Docs, and a myriad of other things that I didn't include on that list, but just so you have some perspective about how our budget breaks down. Basically, there's very little funding that we can consider discretionary. Also, just for your information, the average cost of adding an additional employee is approximately $92,000. So when we think about adding additional staff, we have to keep that figure in mind. As we are developing the budget, there's a few things that we should also keep in mind. We did not go to the full tax levy cap in the 21-22 budget. So there's $2.7 million in banked cap that's available if we should choose to use that. We have a 3-year time frame to use that funding if we choose to do that. Last year, the district received $24.7 million in general fund state aid from the state, which is the highest amount we've received to date. We have no indication as of yet what state aid will look like for the upcoming school year. And finally, in talking about what kind of capital projects we want to do for the 22-23 school year, which we also approve as we are approving the budget, a little bit of a difficult year because of the bond referendum process. And if I had a crystal ball and could know how that's going to work out, we could probably plan better, but anticipate that we'll probably have a fairly light capital project campaign next year. 2 things that we will most likely focus on are continuing the exterior ADA work. We'll pick 2 more locations to do that. We did West and Woodcrest last year. On the docket is Beck and Payne, and then we'll pick 2 more schools to move forward with. And also doing some updated playground work at Barkley. They have some IDEA ARP funds that could supplement that project with some accessibility ramps. So we're looking to do some improvements at Barkley as well. So probably a fairly light capital projects list as we kind of plan and see what happens with the bond referendum. Are there any questions?
Not really a question, but more of a statement. As it's just so shocking how we're and a good thing that across the board everybody is looking at things such as like acronyms even being remotely offensive, and as soon as you said it, I was trying to Google something that's like, oh my goodness, wow, and we were doing that for years. So it's just, I love that our district is on top of these things right away, and even on a national level, all the way down to like just finances. It's time for us to make some changes and make sure we're speaking appropriately. So just wanted to add that. That's awesome.
Is there anything else for BNF? Okay. Okay, if there are no other questions, then we'll go to Human Resources and I'll turn it back to Mrs. Schultz.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. The microphones really don't like me tonight. So the HR committee did meet today around 5:30. We discussed two things. The first was the resolution, which is in regards to the increase of salary. So effective January 1st, you will see on tonight's agenda the minimum wage that will go into effect January 1st, and that minimum wage will be raised to $13. That is, we are raising the minimum wage to meet the state requirements. So that is on tonight's agenda. And then the second item that was discussed was some salary adjustments for the B&G department. And this is, we are looking to do this to attract and retain some staff. So I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Sugars just to talk through the increases and the strategy behind how we're looking to raise these so that it's a little bit more cost effective for the district.
Yes, as we are all aware, hiring for positions right now is extremely difficult and maintaining staff has been difficult as well. And so I know that as we were working through contract negotiations and things of that nature, we had spoken a couple times about potentially needing to make some adjustments in order to maintain staff and attract new staff. We seem to find ourselves in a pattern of providing training, and then we have employees leave because they go to work someplace else where they can make more money. And when we have open positions, which currently we have several open positions in that department, we're having a hard time attracting employees. The minimum salaries for the B&G department are in the $28,000 to $31,500 range for some of our positions. And as we're looking at minimum wage changes, and if we divide some of those salaries down into an hourly salary, we're definitely about at the current minimum wage or just slightly above it. So we decided that we wanted to make some adjustments to those minimum salaries to attract new employees and again to maintain the employees that we have that would put those wages in a more competitive area. And so this was not something that we had budgeted for, and we wanted to get through our CAGA negotiations before we took a closer look at this. We will take some of the salary adjustments through the settlement to help adjust those salaries, but also make a board adjustment as well. The salary changes would be in effect January 1st. It will cost us about $100,000 to make those adjustments January 1st. That money will come out of the B&G budget. We've already decided to put aside a couple of items in order to do that. And then we would make another adjustment again, July 1st to those salaries to get them to the minimums that we're looking at. And that would give us an opportunity to budget for those salary increases through the annual budget process. So it would really be a two-step process of doing partial adjustment January 1st that would not be retroactive, and then doing a second adjustment in the next fiscal year of July 1st in order to move those minimum salaries from the $29,000 to $31,000 range to the $40,000 to $44,000 range in order to keep and maintain some of those employees. Are there any questions about that?
I don't see any questions, and that was the HR agenda for this evening. Thank you, Mrs. Neary.
Great, thank you, Ms. Schultz. That will bring us then to policy and legislation, and I will turn it over to Mr. Ovadia this evening.
Thanks, Mrs. Neary. All right, so in the backup for today, you'll see quite a few legislative updates. And so I just wanted to pause to see if anyone wanted to specifically talk about any of the A's or any of the S's, of which there are quite a few, I guess. I guess people have felt good about.
Were there any highlights on those, Dr. Malash, that we wanted to call out specifically, since there are so many?
Ms. Weddington, was there anything specific?
There is not, Dr. Malash.
I did have one, if no one else on the board does. But I see in one of the things, there's a school funding formula evaluation task force. And I just, because this is a hot Cherry Hill topic, I just wondered, I just saw a news article recently about having to restore some funding to the Abbott districts. And then S2, and with what happened with State Senator Sweeney, do we, because I know this just came up also at BNF, I mean, do we have kind of a point of view in terms of what's happening in the legislative space around school funding and what perhaps as a community or as a board we should be poised to get ready for?
So the proposed legislation that's coming out of the state Senate wants to put together a group of folks consisting of 7 members of the public, the commissioner of the ed, to get together and talk about funding within the districts from the state level, about reallocation of state funding, and then issue a final report to the governor and to the legislature. It does not set a date as to when that final report would be made or when we would expect to see additional information. Based on the gubernatorial election, and the continued alignment of the state legislature, we're operating with the assumption that they're going to continue with the messages that they've been sending about the continued increase in funding to school districts. We don't have any reason to believe right now that that would change. In the discussions that I've had with Assemblywoman Lampitt and Assemblyman Greenwald and Senator Beach, none of our legislative officials have indicated that they are expecting any change in the approach that the state's going to take moving forward. So that's where we are in expectation right now. Just as in every year when the governor does his address, we'll get more information and more of a perspective of what that will look like. But we're planning, that we're going to be at least where we were this year, moving forward. The ideal is that we continue to climb the ladder towards that full funding as the governor has talked about.
Thank you, Dr. Malash. We have one item for first reading.
Mr. Avagan.
Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to, you asked about board member input. I thought it was interesting in light of the presentation we had about STEM and the increasing interest in STEM, that there's also legislation that may require, that if it passes, would require instruction on cybersecurity in high school. And then it would provide funding to train or loan redemption, I guess, for training programs for people who, in certain cybersecurity occupations. So I just think, we're kind of on the right track when we're moving more in that direction. It's also where the state's looking.
We'll see how that student survey turns out, see how the interest is in cybersecurity. Okay. Last call on the A's and the S's. Okay, we have one item for first reading tonight. It is called Policy 2464, Gifted and Talented. Any comments or concerns or clarifications on that? Mr.
Just a quick clarification. Does gifted and talented specifically relate, apply to elementary level? Or does this policy also apply to middle and high school levels?
So it applies K-12.
Okay, so if I'm reading this right, it looks like it's just the policy where it's revised to kind of focus on being more inclusive overall to all of our student population? Am I kind of, is that the big picture with the changes?
It really requires us to create a report that we need to send annually to the Department of Education, provide more information on the website to parents about how we identify students who are gifted and talented. There was one more major thing. Maybe it's just two.
A complaint.
A complaint procedure. If parents have concerns about how we identify students.
Okay, and if there's no other comment, then for second reading tonight, and if anyone wants to make any notes on this, just let me know. But just to read it out for the record, we've got P 5751, sexual harassment of students, P 2422, comprehensive health and physical education, P 2467, surrogate parents and resource family parents, P 5111, eligibility of resident, non-resident students, P 5116, education of homeless children, PNR 7432, eye protection, and P 8420, emergency and crisis situations, and R 8420.1, fire and fire drills. Any comments, questions on those? Back to you, Mrs. Back to you, Mrs.
Thank you, Mr. Ovadia. That will bring us to strategic planning, and then I will turn it back to you, Mr. Ovadia.
It's a pleasure to be turned back to. All right. So I was really thinking about this. Okay, so it's our last strategic planning committee of the whole as this current seated board, as lovely as we all are. And as much as, you know, we've really worked hard. So I just want to, my thanks to all the administrators and all the board members who've engaged in a lot of extra work and reading and meeting people and getting emails and going to town halls and PTA meetings. It's been a lot of a lot, and frankly, it's been great, I think. But I did want to kind of take this culminating moment to say, you know, what have we heard that we've really heard that would inform our behavior and our point of view? You know, what have we learned? I mean, right, we oversee a learning organization that's, as I've said before, essential to the town in so many ways. So what have we learned? You know, not everyone likes the phrase roadshow, but for those that do, the roadshow. And then I think the other piece is that we've gotten quite a bit of written feedback from the community. I could take a stab at some of this, but I just want to kind of set the stage first. You know, what does the written feedback mean, and what are the opportunities based on what people are saying out there? You know, there are numbers being thrown around, one of which, you know, we've really teed up, 396 million. What does it mean, and what kind of trajectory does it inform? And then I think, you know, timeline is always timeline and prioritization buckets for what will be as part of the improvement plan, the bond, the referendum. You know, when is the right time? Just points of view as relates to that. Points of view as relates to new work versus renovation work, you know, the state share, and how does that fit into prioritization? And I guess next steps. Now the next steps is easy, so I can just volunteer that, you know, we've got plan at chclc.org that's open, that's available. We just teed up, you know, specialized thought exchange in partnership with the special ed PTA in town. We've got next week, I think 4 of us are at the town hall at East. That'll have its own thought exchange. And then the following week, we've got at least 2 board members at a virtual seniors town hall mechanism. That's this month. Next month we have, well, apparently we're meeting every Tuesday, which is exciting to know and to plan for as well. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunity to engage, but of course, the sooner, the louder, in some sense, the better. Let me pause there and just say, do board members have a point of view on any of the first three. Because I'm happy to jump ahead, but I feel like I monopolize this sometimes. So I'll just pause to see if there are hands. Mister?
I mean, I think it's, as we're trying to kind of distill the information, a lot of us have attended different meetings, so I know that the administration's working on putting together kind of like almost like a chart where we can all kind of work together and add in information that we've gotten from the different meetings to help us really understand what's the feedback from each school about the priorities and the feedback in general. You know, one of the things that I heard really strongly is that the community is very much interested in making sure that we focus a lot on getting our fair share, our 40% back from the state. And we get that when we focus on projects that are renovation projects. So I think that's something that's been on my mind. There's, you know, I've heard generally community members are kind of, you know, the community members who are wondering why we haven't done this before, on board with it. There's some community members who want to see us get the projects that get our fair share. Some other community members want us to go for the entire amount, which is, you know, a pretty big number. I think we really want to be very deliberate in how we make these decisions. We want to make sure we're really providing a clear sense to the community of what's the real cost going to be to each household. And, you know, I also think when we talk about capital reserves and we think about, you know, one of the things that's been on my mind is we got feedback about some projects that I think are, you know, perhaps we need to take a look at whether or not, you know, the bond passes, whether, you know, maybe there's some projects that we even start to do smaller projects, but that are really meaningful to this community and really meaningful to the schools. So, you know, those are just some of the things I'm thinking about, but I'm looking forward to having this kind of easy, user-friendly chart that we can all kind of add to, so that because none of us went to every meeting. So.
Good, some good points. Thank you, Mr. Let me jump in. Let me jump in at the risk of people saying I monopolize. I'll monopolize a bit. So first of all, look, I think it just can't be understated. And so that even I've said that before, I'll say it again. This was important. I don't know how many meetings it was with, you know, Dr. Melange was at almost all of them, but so were we, right? And so were so many of our friends on the stage. And I think that level of effort and that level of engagement is critical. And frankly, it's unique. I mean, it's not often that in teeing something up, you spend this much deliberate time, you know, with people and do that level of invites. Okay, a couple big themes that I took away from the meetings I went to and what I've read and seen. Improvement in our schools is needed, period. A bond mechanism to accomplish some of that amount of projects is needed, period. I don't think anyone that I've met has questioned these two fundamental pieces. Now, people have spent a lot more time than I had expected on outdoors and playgrounds, right outside the schools, the playground facilities. That's a lot of feedback that needs to be considered. People have bought into and people do align around HVAC and building systems, around safety, around ADA compliance, around educational programs and spaces, to see the value of what we're doing in bricks and mortar circled back to what we deliver in educational instruction. Modernization comes up. People did say $400 million is a lot of work. I can't believe that amount of work is needed. But then I think people have accepted that that amount of work is needed. However, you do have people who say 400 million is way too much. And you do have people who say, and have said to my face, or at least, in rooms I've been in, maybe it wasn't so accusatory, but they've said, you need to go for 400 million. If it's a need, why wouldn't you go for it? Now, to me, the only mechanism we could do to give both voices an ability to weigh in is to do a multi-question. You know, I would hate for us to go, you know, for an amount like $400 million and be this close and get zero. Just the amount of work. I mean, you know, the amount of downtime between engagements where we can ask the community for support. To me, it's too big a risk. But that's not an individual decision. That's just my individual maybe bias and, you know, maybe risk aversion. Another interesting thing is, so I've been at a couple meetings where teachers were just like, we need a teacher to talk, someone said in the community. And I think what I found in the written feedback of thought exchange is it was an easier and safer mechanism to deliver that feedback. It will not surprise you to know that there are many days in my week where I wonder if I've gone too far at work with being brutally honest and in people's face. At work, that's not always so easy to do. You know, you have a boss, that boss writes stuff about you, you know, it's one of those things. It's a high risk environment to say, you know, these facilities aren't good enough as a teacher and staff member. I think that in written form, we got a lot more feedback from our teachers. And I think they're critical stakeholder groups. I think we should think about that going forward. Okay. The other thing is, I really do think if we can hit September of 2022, that we should. I think, I mean, it's one of those, you know, here I was earlier saying we need more time, but in this case, I think we get in before midterm elections. We have some time to really tee this up. You know, we're obviously going to have a lot more engagements with the community, but I don't see a reason, unless someone else does, you know, not to try to go for September of this year. No, I'm sorry, of next year. And so, you know, that's been a question that was asked in the community, and I don't know, my bent is definitely to try to do September if we can. The other thing, I guess in my last comment is, I think the 40% messaging is very powerful. However, I think there are items we need to do that won't get 40%. And I think there are items that could get 40% that we don't need to do. So I think it's not as black and white as sometimes people make it, myself included, to try to be clear and concise. There are other factors. However, at the most important line, significant, you know, participation from the state, I think, is essential. And with that, I would call on other people. Okay, Mrs. Tom.
Thank you. I do want to ask questions regarding the bond, or I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask. If we do like multiple bonds, how much money we have to do to, I guess, each time we do the bond going out, how much money do we spend? And if we do 200, 300 million, 200, 300, 400 million each time, how much it will cost to do the bonds, okay? The other thing is, if we do for the 200, 300, 400, how much tax increase on the, I guess, on the town, on the property owners? If there's anybody can, you know, come up with some answers, maybe that'll be helpful for us to, as a board member and the communities, to think what is the best way to do this this referendum, because what we do, as according to what Mr. Garrison, everybody, I guess, come up with the answer is that our school definitely needs some major renovations. So we hope to bring the school to a better standard and better to 21st century learning for the student. All right, I think that's all I have right now. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, and I think, Mrs. Stone, what you're saying is critical, is that we do need to see what this is in dollars and cents. And I think we'll look, you know, with Mr. Garrison's help, and of course, Dr. Washington Sugars, at some scenario analysis that will be essential. And then, it has an individual, I think the average assessed home is 225,000. So we'll look at that and, models various scenarios to present.
I just, looking at things from a risk perspective, that alarms people, right? In my, how even in my professional space, I try not to do that. There's opportunities everywhere to expand and really build a bond that's going to work and benefit for everybody. Everybody has an opportunity to make this happen and make it happen for what we need in this community, right? So I just want to make sure that if that language comes up, that we focus on, here are the opportunities that we do have ahead of us, and try to move that conversation to the in other directions, because there risk, I understand that, but we have more in opportunities available to us, especially with all the presentations and the engagement factors and the conversations with the community members and the continued conversations, the work that Mr. Garrison and his team and the strategic planning committee have put together. It's so much, which is why, yes, $400 million off the bat, it overwhelms people, but you're really still looking at needs versus wants, you know what I mean? So once we get, after we get all the feedback, I think we'll be in a better position to say, well, realistically, this is what we can, as an opportunity, this is what we have here. I'm not sure right now I can make a decision on whether that's one question or two questions or what that's going to look like. I do really want to have something by September if I was looking, you know what I mean? I think that was what we are envisioned for next year. And I think as long as we keep to the plan that we have right now and finalizing these conversations and putting something forward, I think it's doable. I mean, this is my first experience in working on this process. So, but I do feel like just keep looking at it as opportunities, because each of these buildings that we have in our district is an opportunity for something better to happen with this, with building a bond.
Mrs. Neary?
It just, in speaking to Rosie's point, it would be hard to say right now, but in thinking about, one question, two question, three question, I would just be concerned about sending out multiple questions and people thinking the work that lands in question 3 by default is just not as needed. And I wouldn't want that to come back and hurt the overall goal, because there's a perception that you put it there, it's not as needed. So things to think about, not necessarily saying one way or the other, but just something to think about. I think it was a challenge the first go around when they're looking at options, how it's laid out.
Mr.
I mean, I'm really, I'm really listening to everybody, and I have to say, this is and just acknowledging this is a very heavy lift. This board is the four of us, one, right, two, four, five, several of us. It's getting late. Several of us will be here in January when we finally make the decision, and several of us won't. But this is a big thing, and I think it's an all hands on deck. It's a huge. I think it really requires us to kind of I know I'm going to go back and just, between the feedback, hopefully we have that chart or table to look at with all of the input from the different schools. We've got the thought exchange that we're distilling. I'm really going to take a look at the projects again and again and again and really start to look through, how do we, that piece about kind of needs versus want, the piece about the needs versus want in the 40% versus the full cost to the district, it's a lot. And I know I'm going to prepare some good time to set aside to really do it. So, I really want to thank Mr. Avadia for kind of leading this whole charge for us on behalf of the board. And, hopefully we can all really feel good about what we come to a decision about in January.
Mrs. Dawn, please.
My other thing is I'm thinking about how is our grant writers and the naming rights coming along? Has any progress been made or what? I'm just curious.
So it's, for us, it really falls under BNF, but I don't know if Mrs. Sugars, if you want to jump in or another time.
Well, we've been working with a grant writer for the past couple months, and we have a couple irons in the fire. We haven't seen anything come our way so far through the grant writer that relates to facilities per se, but we have, not in a big way, but we have looked at mainly focusing on educational type things with the grant writer. Naming rights, I think if the board wants to move in that direction, we can take a look at that. I've done it, looked at it in previous districts. Really was not the revenue source that we thought it might be. Certainly when you're looking at the amount of work that needs to be done, you wouldn't have enough property to name in order to make an impact on the amount of and the funds that need to be raised to get the work done.
So just trying to combine a couple of comments from the board. I think what would be nice is to think about just looking at some data, maybe in a Friday memo to come, that looks at, a few scenarios at a few different dollar amounts. It starts to hash out, what's the kind of, let's say, average household, but what does that mean in terms of projects and what, in a needs versus wants world, what starts to be prioritized. So, I would look at, just these numbers aren't necessarily the right ones, but, 250, 300, 350, and what that could look like, because, as we're alluding to, in a month and a half, we're going to have to really shape this. And so I think, this board and this administration that has worked so hard, I don't think we can't continue just working hard to just try to study this and get our hands around it. I think one of the things is there's a simplicity to the bond and to this improvement program, and there's a great complexity. And the complexity, even having studied this closely for years, really can just be stunning. And so we just do need the time to digest and be able to navigate something. With a time compression, I'd look at maybe 3 or 4 scenarios. Not to put an unfair burden on Mr. Garrison, but I think he probably has sketched some of this stuff out. And so any parting thoughts on strategic planning or any of this? All right, thanks, Mrs. Neary, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ovadia. Okay, that actually brings us to our special action agenda. And the superintendent recommends, and I move the following: item 16.1, action consent to approve items 17 through 20. Do I have a second? Mrs. Schultz, are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars. Okay. Oh, okay. I need to abstain from items 20.1 and 20.2. And then yes to the remaining. Are there any other abstentions?
I need to abstain to Beata Home Health and Henry Schein on the bill list, please.
I need to abstain from 20.1, please.
Okay, other than the exceptions noted, we have a unanimous yes vote. Okay, that will bring us then to new business, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Malaj.
Thank you, Ms. Sneary. I just have one item to go through. I shared with the board in the weekend memo an outline to fill the board vacancy that will exist effective the beginning of January. As Mrs. Matlack announced previous meeting that she would be stepping down from the board after her 11 years of service. So I just want to go over this tonight, just remind the board what the timeframe will be, put it out there for the community. We will also post this for the community tomorrow. Mrs. Wilson and I will work with Mr. Plavinsky and Mr. Holman to get the information posted on the website as well. So there'll be an ad that will be placed and will be posted in the Courier Post, which is our paper of record on Monday, January the 3rd, advertising the vacancy. Again, we will also post internally and share the information. In that ad, we will ask for folks who are interested in fulfilling or being appointed to the board seat to submit a letter of interest and a resume, which will be submitted to Mrs. Sugars by January the 13th. And that's all they will need to submit. And again, in order to be eligible, people have to be, Mrs. Sugars, it's a resident of the township, Mr. Green, above 18 years of age, right? And then on the 14th, we will disseminate the applicant information to the board as part of a confidential memo, the copies of all the letters and the resumes that we've received. On January 18th, during a closed session of the board will have discussion on the applicants during executive session, and then set a number of interviewees will be selected. Interviews will take place on January the 25th during a public session, special public session prior to the special board meeting using a candidate forum format. Deliberation and consensus sought will take place in executive session on the candidate. And then the candidate will be notified for appointment on February the 8th. And then February the 8th, which is the work session, the first meeting in February, we'll have the appointment and introduction of the new board member. So it's the same process that we used back in the summer of 2019 when we replaced filled 2 vacant seats. We've taken about 2.5 weeks off of the process that was used at that time. Again, there is an urgency in order to have a full board as we get into the new year, just with the work that's being done as we progress into the spring. So people look for that information. Again, we'll post on our website what the time frame is and how to contact or send the information to Mrs. Sugars.
Thank you, Dr. Malaj. Were there any other items for new business? Okay, that'll bring us to old business. Were there any items for old business? Okay, that'll bring us then to the second public comment. And the second public comment is on any item for 3 minutes. And as usual, please state your full name and municipality. And we'll start with the audience.
I waited 3 hours for that. Hi, my name is Tammy Radin, Cherry Hill. I came out tonight because I really wanted to say thank you to the administration and to the Board of Ed for the letter that went out yesterday over email denouncing anti-Semitism in our community. We must constantly denounce all hate when we see it and when we hear it. So I really, really commend the administration and the board for sending that letter out. It really meant a lot. On another note, I want to thank Carol for all her work she's done over the years. I do remember eating your soda bread. It was really good. Send out the recipe. I also want to thank Ruth and Lori for all their work they've done on the board. I know it's alive. I also just had to add in, I love all the STEM classes. My sons are taking it and really love it. So I really appreciate everything. I wanted to thank Mr. Beaufort, but I agree with everything the board, the reaction to seeing the excitement from all the students. Getting back to the middle school reconfiguration, I think there's an option 6. And option 6 is revert back to the lottery and bring Rosa back. That could be an option. Regarding the thought exchange, a lot of community members really find it difficult. And I would really recommend that we do like a basic survey, something a little bit more, with some 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet points. But it's just not easy to navigate and it's not transparent. So that's just a suggestion. And I agree that with the thoughts that came up at the meeting, that there'll be multiple town halls. I think with all the work that's coming, I think the parents' voice is important, student voice is important, community voice is important. And it's very important that everybody has a chance to voice their opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next we'll go to the line. It's Laura. Please state your full name and municipality.
Hi, my name is Laura Pendergast, and I live in Cherry Hill. And I just wanted to call to say, first of all, I'm very proud to be in this district, and I really appreciate the commitment to diversity and the way that that's reflected in the plan for middle school redistricting. But I do have a concern from a data perspective, and it's this. The analyses that were presented tonight were based on the current configurations demographically of the elementary schools as they currently stand. But my understanding is that we are also going to rezone the elementary schools. So that would likely change the data and the results for the middle school redistricting. And I'm concerned that it could possibly influence the outcomes, and this really important goal of equity and diversity at all of our schools. And I do hope that we are continuing to talk about and engage in redistricting the elementary schools. I know the school that my son attends, ARC, is very overcrowded right now. There isn't, I don't know that they're going to have enough classroom space for next year. And it's also the least diverse school in the district. And just looking at the map, that doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be. So I hope that we are, first of all, redistricting the elementary schools, and that we consider that redistricting before we finalize the plan for redistricting the middle schools. That's all. Thanks for your good work. I'm happy to help in any way that I can. And please, I again appreciate the goals of this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience?
Hi, I am Allison Carley. I live in Cherry Hill. I have a 6th grader who currently goes to Rosa, and she will be an 8th grader, so she'll be impacted by this in her final year in school. And while I appreciate the hard work the committee did, and I recognize that equity and diversity are very important to most everybody, that they didn't look into the idea, piggybacking on the previous idea, of just redrawing the lines of the school, not using sending schools, but redrawing the lines however you wanted to include more equity. The district we belong to is Hart, And it is not even a contiguous district. There are several pockets that are sent to this school. So I don't see how it would matter saying half of Hart is closer to Beck, the other half of Hart is closer to Rosa. Not even looking into that is, I think, maybe an option 7. Yeah, option 4 would nullify any type of grandfathering in if you do choose to go with option 5. And we should really consider the mental health of the current 6th grade crop as they become 8th graders and will need to, like our young child said earlier today, how they would feel being separated as a family. And because it is such a small school, they really do feel like a family. And if you decide to do options 4 or stick with redistricting, will the current crop be allowed to then say, if I had known this, I would not have let her join the lottery to go Rosa? Could she then switch to Beck so she could have more time in a community to get to know the kids there instead of being forced into it on her last year in the middle school level? And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, go to Karen Bell on the line.
Okay, I'm really excited that this is the right time to talk. I feel like everyone says thank you. Let's start with a thank you to everyone. Okay, so I think it's really important to discuss the time children spend on buses. I don't think that anyone today discussed the experience of being on a bus for over an hour in the morning and over an hour in the afternoon. I think we just discussed they're long, they're short. It's a long time. That's going to affect your child when they wake up in the morning, how tired they are, when they get there, and that's their mental health. As far as those bus rides, that's also going to impact, as far as the districting, you talk about mental health and where they go to school. Okay, well, what do you expect them to ride their bike 20 minutes to go play with somebody? That's just not reasonable. They can't walk over. So you have to, when you think about your redistricting, you need to think about what kind of social support they have. And you're basically stratifying communities that exist or that could possibly happen. As far as the busing getting better, I find that even though our bus people are really nice, Miss King, we have a couple problems going on. We have 1 late bus at the schools, not 2. The late buses take longer because the late buses are many different areas, which would just get even worse with a lot of these plans that are happening. We have a staff shortage in the district with busing in the world right now, right? That gets us to school time and busing that really, I know you're already on that. Okay, let's go next to the 6th grade center. I completely disagree with that. I think that's a terrible idea. I think you're playing number manipulation to basically create, I don't know what, but you've got a bunch of people complaining today. We're so concerned about social and emotional growth, and we're going to make them go to 1 more school. That makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't even understand why I understand why it's an option presented. I do not understand why it's recommended. And especially that's the one you want to throw money at. You want to disrupt all these kids. You want to put more money in that one. That does not considering the experience, which is the same theme of what I was saying before. As far as what happened with the math program, I'm disappointed. You basically knocked out an option for a lot of the middle school kids. And no one here has talked about the turnover that occurred in all our residences during COVID and how many people have purchased and left the district and added younger children and what's going to happen in the next decade. How much time do I have?
It's
I'm
up,
done.
Mrs. Bell.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
thank you very much for listening. And thank you for.
Okay, next
Hi.
we'll go to the audience.
Good evening, Kristen Bigliotta, Cherry Hill. We can very easily find studies that say a 6th grade center is the best direction to take middle school in, just as easily as we can find studies that say a more traditional middle school approach is best. And there are valid and robust opinions on both sides. What continues to persist since March 13th of 2020, when Cherry Hill schools, along with much of the rest of the country, shut down is the continued trauma many of our students are coping with due to the impact COVID-19 has had on each of them socially, mentally, and emotionally. These proposed middle-level changes, particularly option 4, has the potential to impact about 500 of our current 5th and 6th graders who are or will be at Rosa, as it seems impossible with that option to let the current Rosa students finish their middle school years there. Regarding option 4, has the district, or when will the district, consult with psychologists who specialize in trauma-informed practices to fully understand what yet another transition could do to this subset of the district's children who continue to bear the mental, social, and emotional toll that COVID has? Is an additional transition what's best for them? The New Jersey Association of Hospitals has seen an 84% increase in depression and a 74% increase in anxiety in patients under 18 from 2019 to 2020. When it comes to anxiety, 2 words I've continued to be told should be prioritized are consistent and routine. Keep things consistent for these kids and keep their routine the same. Don't add an additional transition. Some remaining questions I have was, why weren't there any general education parents or any special education parents on that committee? With option 5, will students at Rosa be allowed to remain at Rosa to finish middle school? I'm assuming that to be impossible with option 4, but please correct me if I'm wrong. If the district is looking at elementary reconfiguration next, how can the committee be sure that splitting the elementary schools in these exact iterations that were presented tonight yield what was presented? And 4, it was presented that larger total populations at one middle versus another is an inequitable distribution of students, which I understand. But do larger total populations at one middle school necessarily equate to larger class sizes? At first pass, I think that may not be the case, as I currently believe that at Rosa, with the smallest total population, that school has the largest average class size at the middle level. Is there a concern for other reasons in addition to class size? And finally, if the deadline gets pushed back on board selecting their option, is it possible to push the lottery back to later in the spring for next year? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we'll go to the line. I believe it's Dr. Podowitz.
Okay, Jeff Podowitz, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Referring again to a report that I previously referred to for the Cherry Hill School District found on the New Jersey DOE website for year ending June 30th, 2020. You can also find the Auditor's Management Report. So just Google New Jersey DOE plus AMR and you'll find both. Page 182. You can find the legal debt margin for the Cherry Hill Town School District from year 2019 to 2020. In 2019, our legal debt margin was $327,963,000. That is our legal debt limit, according to that report and according to the state. Note that the bond that was voted on in 2018 represented a debt of approximately $306 million. The principal was approximately $210 million. The state would have hopefully reimbursed us approximately $93 million of our $306 million debt on a bond of approximately $210 million. Our debt limit for 2020 is listed on page 182 as $331,652,000. The school district is aware what the legal debt limit is for 2021 and could estimate what it would be for 2022. Administrators, since it is and will by public record on the DOE website, what will that legal debt limit be for the year ending June 30th, 2021? Note, a bond principal of $300 million would result in approximately a total debt of $450 million, significantly over what is to be our legal debt limit. Based on 10,800 students, that is a debt of $41,600 per student, which is considered to be very high. That's a high debt for any district to bear. We remember are a middle-class district, even though the state feels we're wealthy, we're not. Also, please, on another issue, Google search the George School, that's in Bucks County, plus IB program. Read how good a program the IB program was and what we are giving up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, were there any other public comments in the audience or on the line? Okay, go to the audience.
Good evening. My name is Janet Hung, and I'm chair of the Cherry Hill Zone PTA. We'd first like to thank Mrs. Weddington and the committee for your time, research, and presentation on the possible configurations to best serve our middle school students. As the board and district discussions continue, we respectfully request these areas are considered. Number one, bus transportation. How long will students be traveling to and from school and on the late bus? With the ongoing bus driver shortages, will there be drivers available for all the runs needed to transport students in a timely manner? Two, what impact will the configurations have on extracurriculars such as athletic, music, and theater programs, student government, yearbook, school paper, and many clubs the middle schools offer? While these activities are not academic in nature, they have great impact on the middle school students' development as a young adult. Three, generally parental PTA involvement and fundraising opportunities decrease as the grade levels increase. What impact will the configurations have on PTA's ability to support the students, families, and staff? Thank you for your time and consideration. As always, the Zone PTA table looks forward to working to our continued work together to benefit the Cherry Hill students. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have on the line Beth Becker.
Hi, Beth Becker, Cherry Hill. First off, I didn't see anything about how the redistricting of elementary schools will affect the middle school plans. These numbers presented tonight seem to be based on current and projected enrollment, but it doesn't seem that the elementary school redistricting was considered, which seems like to me putting the cart before the horse. And on that note, was it considered maybe being done by neighborhood, not elementary school? Several neighborhoods district to many schools right now, Old Orchard, for example. And it seems like it might make more sense to look at by neighborhood. Also, I ask that you redistrict the middle, as you redistrict the middle schools, you make sure that the special ed programs are available at all schools as much as possible, and that you take into consideration making the curriculum equitable among the three schools as well. For example, 6th grade world language. I just want to thank you for all the work you've done to look into the ethnic and socioeconomic impact this will make. It's very important. I'm also asking the board that for whatever the middle school plan is, to please consider grandfathering in the kids already in school. Students currently in 6th grade will be in 8th, the first year of this new redistricting plan. They had 4th grade cut short by COVID, 5th grade was difficult, and now they're in 6th, not really socially or emotionally prepared for middle school, but they are nonetheless. They're finding their way. They're joining extracurriculars that are helping them figure out who they are and making friends from other schools they never knew before. Now in 8th grade, 1/3 of these kids, 1/3 of the kids in their grade approximately, are going to be moved to another school where 2/3 of the kids have been together for 2 years with different clubs than were at their old school. Many of them aren't even the same because clubs are different at every school. So they won't even find the clubs that they were involved in 6th and 7th grade in 8th grade. Leadership opportunities that would have been open to them in 8th grade in their existing extracurriculars are no longer available. Not to mention different administration, teachers, counselors, building procedures. Even without the past 2 years these kids have had, I'd be asking you to grandfather in kids who aren't already in a transition year due to the issues addressed above. But with a disruption to education, social and emotional learning, I think it's imperative that you grandfather in students, middle school students. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to
Rick Short, Cherry Hill. First, a many thanks to the district for, and this is a silly many thanks, the athletic department and the free basketball games. It is the basketball season, and it's great that we get to watch basketball games from Cherry Hill for free. I hate to have to watch Washington Township and pay $29.99 a game, so I thank you for that. Ms. Matlack, thank you for your service and the many, many hours of work. Ms. Schultz, Ms. Neary. Okay, so why are we redistricting? Is it because of equity? Is that the problem here? Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you've witnessed an equity colossal mess, a complete equity mess. I go back to the first speaker. You know, why don't we just keep Rosa the same way it is? Keep the lottery. Are we doing this because of equity? Because you have opened Pandora's box with so many confusing problems on problems on problems. Well, this person did this and this race is that. It's just ridiculous how much controversy this is going to cause because of equity in this stupid school district. And then we're going to do it to the stupid elementary schools. And then what's next? We've got to do it to the high schools because everything's got to be equitable in Cherry Hill. It's ridiculous. You're actually creating more problems than what it's worth. All right, going back to equity again. Why isn't there equity in pay for the student teachers? You're telling me you're paying them $13 an hour? You should almost be embarrassed. I mean, I don't know what the real base pay is, but you're telling me you start people at $13 an hour and then you wonder why you don't get any employees? It's because capitalism is not working. Equity is not working in this school. You have to pay people a higher amount of money to get them to work here. And it's the same problem with food, but that's a whole different issue. The bond. Oh my God, Mr. Odavia. You're saying to put it at 6 months, at 181 days, you're gonna end up in this, history is gonna repeat itself again. You don't have the PTA support. You should be using the PTA you should be redoing libraries with the help of the PTA. You can't do this all yourself. You need community help. And I also want to go on the record with Bob Garrison's mistake of the year. I mean, he said on October 13th that it's required that you have to have bipolar in the state of Pennsylvania. That was totally incorrect. That would be like a police officer saying in Cherry Hill that they don't have handgun permits in the state of Pennsylvania. It's just a blatant thing. So consider, don't put bipolar into the bond. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Alana Yaras on the line.
Alana Yaris, Cherry Hill. I just wanted to speak on a few different items. First, I was a volunteer at one of the schools this week for our book fair, and there was a shelter in place that occurred. And I just wanted to say, being a visitor to the school and not actually knowing what to do for the school, particularly for shelter in place, the teacher pointed out where on the wall there were directions and what we needed to do. And I was thankful for how well trained the teachers were, and the students were unaffected by the shelter in place being called. And I just wanted to commend Barclay Early Childhood Center for it. Second, the social emotional learning that's occurring in the school district. I'm just wondering when students will be able to play together instead of parallel play. In kindergarten, parallel play is not the preferred method of play. They should be interacting with other students. And at conferences, when speaking to my child's teacher, I was informed that the students are not allowed to play together. They can play next to each other, but not together. And I don't know how that helps in social skills and being able to learn how to cooperate with others. And so I would just like a further look into how the students can be playing together so that they can learn how to socialize and not cry if they don't get their way, because although a kindergartner does it, it's not really okay. But when a fourth grader or older does it also, they're not learning the social skills they need to. Finally, for the middle school redistricting, was it looked at to look at neighborhoods instead of schools where students go? the neighborhood I currently live in is zoned for one elementary school, but is closer to another elementary school. However, I live within 2 minutes walking distance to Carusi Middle School. So I would assume my neighborhood would be zoned for Carusi. But there are neighborhoods that maybe are closer to other middle schools and they may be zoned for a farther away middle school. And so instead of looking at it at the elementary school level and where students are going for elementary school, maybe it should be looked at a neighborhood level and using those neighborhoods to zone the middle schools instead of the elementary schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Yaris. Ms. Stratton, did you have a question? I saw your hand up in the panel.
I know board members are permitted to make a public comment as a regular person, correct? Because that's what I would like to do during the section if that's possible.
It's a regular person. Yeah.
Okay, so
After public comment.
after public comment, okay. Was there any other public comment? Okay, so seeing no other comment. Ms. Stratton?
Thank you. Corinne Elmore Stratton, Cherry Hill Municipality. So I just want to first thank everybody from the community that comes in here and speaks their mind and shares their values and shares their opinion. And the only thing that I would ask as someone that is a member of this community is that we remind ourselves that there's a level of decorum that needs to happen in these meetings. And although we have it printed on the agenda for everyone to view and to see, it is very disheartening and very difficult as a member of the community to have folks get up and refer to different projects as stupid, or folks that are in committees as stupid, or in any other that is demeaning reference or adjective to the folks that are working very hard to make sure that everyone is heard, everyone is valued, and everybody is understood. And so just, tonight I'm speaking as a community member who would just like to remind my other community members of all of our public schools that we all have the right to come here and speak respectfully. And I hope that we will, when we're speaking, we will model the respect that we would want our students to speak to each other with, even when in disagreement or in debate. And so, it's not fair for any of the volunteers on this board to be subject to that continuously. And as we are ending the year 2021, where there is members of this board that have been subject to this repeatedly, night after giving more than 40 hours of work week to this district, it is unfair to come here and demean them or demean this administration or anybody in this public school at all, just because of how you are feeling. So I just had to say that in my own behalf. And, as a community member, I apologize to all of the board members, to the administrators, and to even some of the parents that have to sit through these things and feel the cringe of the feeling of people that will come here and use this as a platform to be disrespectful. So I hope that moving forward into the new year, we all go into the new year with some decorum. And again, model behaviors that we want to see modeled in our communities in each one of our schools. Thank you.
Stratton. Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll end public comment and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Malash for superintendent comments.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. I do have a couple of things that I can follow up on. Thank you, Ms. Elmore Stratton, for your comments. There was a comment about kindergartners not being allowed to play together. I would encourage the caller, Ms. Yaris, to follow up, contact Dr. Rickensrud. I'm not sure whether that is specific to a time period in the classroom, because I've been at all the elementary schools during recess, and I see kindergartners playing together all the time. So I would encourage you to follow up with Dr. Rick and have additional conversation with him. The pay that was discussed and the raise in minimum wage has nothing to do with paying student teachers. We don't pay student teachers. Student teaching, when it occurs in the district, is done as part of a collegiate experience, part of a clinical experience. Student teachers are not paid. We do have folks who work for us for our educational assistants or work in the building facilities department, who will be impacted by that raise in the minimum wage, which will take place in January. I'm just going to kind of say this over there were a lot of questions and comments which we expected about the presentation that Mrs. Wethington and her committee delivered. And again, special thank you to Mrs. Wethington and all of the members of the committee. And we hope that people will continue to comment, will continue to be involved actively in the discussion about what's going on with assignment of middle schools. The committee, as they met from the summer up to and including last week to put all that information together, looked at things from a myriad of angles. Special ed was involved in all of the discussions. It's part of the reason that Mrs. Wethington chaired the committee and that Ms. Mallory, as our director of special ed, was on that committee. It's the reason that we used Ms. Schmidt-Sadwin as our researcher. She is one of the members of the committee. She and Mrs. Cohen are the two longest tenured members in the school district who sat on the committee. And Ms. Sadwin has access to all of the data, including to Dr. Gripp's report, to which she referred. There were a lot of comments that came out tonight that people asked about, don't the elementary schools have to be done before the middle schools? And the answer is they do not. The elementary schools are also projected at how many kids, regardless of how many kids are in those buildings currently, but how many kids could possibly be. And that's why Ms. Sadwin included in those lists what the possible maximum projected enrollment could be at the schools and from the elementary schools, which then would feed into the middle schools. So that has been taken into consideration. One of the things to look at when we talk about what the alignment is and what the balancing is, when you look at socioeconomic, when you look at the different categories that we do that students fit into, is we are using a fixed snapshot of data in time. And when we do that, it's based on who those kids were at that time. It does not mean that 5 years from now, it's going to all be exactly the same. That just changes, right? So just so as people look at it, we do not adjust it, with the real-time enrollment as we go through each piece. We take a fixed data point as what's being examined. So no, the elementary schools do not have to be done before the middle schools are done, but it certainly is interesting as part of the discussion. Appreciate the comments from Ms. Hung as the Zone PTA chair. I rely on Zone PTA as a wealth of information that goes two ways, both sharing information, receiving information. Zone PTA and then consequentially the other 19 PTAs that exist in the district are a tremendous source and resource for parents and family members in Cherry Hill. I always encourage parents, if you're not a member, to make sure you join. Just to receive all of the information becomes invaluable, but a tremendous resource and people that we certainly call upon regularly for participation in the discussion. What the debt margin is and what the debt ceiling could possibly be will continue to be part of the ongoing discussion. The letter, and we did receive some follow-up. We did put a letter. I put a letter out yesterday. Mrs. Wilson sent it out last evening about the anti-Semitic experience of what took place at the synagogue in Mount Laurel, which is, many of you in the community know exactly where the synagogue is. We have members of our community who belong to that faith congregation. Regardless, that should not be occurring anywhere. We as a school district, Zone PTA donated the Hate Has No Home Here signs, that have been up at our schools since the summer. It is something that we talk about with kids on a regular basis. And it's terrible to see something like that continue to occur. So we put out that letter to let people know that there are resources here. If there are concerns or there are questions, that they can reach out and to denounce actions such as that. There were comments about equity. Equity is a key component of everything that we do in the school district. It's a lens through which we look and examine all of our work and will continue to be so. I think that is it for tonight, Mrs. Neary, based on comments.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Malash. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. We don't have any items for second executive session this evening. So that would bring us to the end of our meeting. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? Ms. Stern, all in favor? Great, thank you. Have a good evening.